Yeah. By the way, it says that it's live now.
All right, we're live.
And that's when they made me their chief.
And that's why you always keep a towel on hand.
And so that's why I woke up with the goats.
All right, so I think the topic that I'd like to start with is YouTube anarchism praxis.
Okay.
Yeah, so Piper, I feel like you probably have like the most the most of a take on YouTube anarchism praxis, but
well, so what is meant by praxis? Like, what should anarchists do on YouTube?
Kind of, yeah. It's kind of like it goes along the question of like, how to phrase it, because like I've seen some like discourse from people who are just kind of complaining about like some big YouTubers. These YouTubers not necessarily like anarchists per se, but they're leftists or kind of like bred to, as it were, and it's like there's always like there's that kind of like complaint amongst those is that like, well, how about they like do like real praxis or anything like that? So that's kind of like the question: what would like anarchist YouTube praxis be like, as it were? But I can think of like educational videos would be the kind of thing of like just spreading anarchist information.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I think YouTube is a platform that it has its limitations, but
cough cough, the YouTube algorithm.
Oh yeah. But I don't think I think that it has use. So I'm sure there are a lot of people who find the idea of like promoting radical politics on YouTube to be kind of weird and not something that should be done. But I would actually say that YouTube provides a resource insofar as it takes the ideas out of obscure books and puts them on a widely used platform for more general public digestion. So I think it needs to be taken advantage of. The thing that I see with a lot of quote unquote anarchist YouTubers is that what they do is they provide a very simplistic interpretation or rather explanation of the ideas so that they're stripped of their real content, and what people end up getting is this kind of dumbed down version. My girlfriend actually got into an argument with a bigger anarchist YouTuber. I'm not going to name names, but they were saying things like, well, reading, you can't expect working people to read theory. Working people essentially don't have the ability to comprehend complex subjects. So we need to present these ideas in very dumbed down YouTube videos. And I think that's really the wrong approach, because then you're not actually presenting the ideas. You're presenting kind of the contours of the ideas without much of the substance. So that leads to people who get a lot of their politics from whatever the latest YouTuber says, and that's it, really. Whereas, and that's not much of an extension of the anarchist movement. It's not bringing the anarchist movement to YouTube. It's not bringing anarchist theory and praxis to YouTube. That's what I think, quote unquote, anarchist YouTube should be doing. I think you should have in-depth conversations about theoretical points in YouTube videos. I think there should be YouTube videos that talk about what anarchists are doing on the ground. I think there should be YouTube videos that talk about geopolitics. I think if there's going to be an anarchist YouTube community, it needs to be one that is an extension of the anarchist movement and not just some videos that some big name YouTubers put out and they get to make a career off it, which is what I think it mostly is now. I mean, what I try to do with my videos is I try to provide those kind of this kind of broader content, whereas I guess most big name leftist YouTubers, usually what they're doing is they're either going to talk about some kind of hot button issue of social justice, or they're going to talk about how right wingers on this site are dumb. And yeah, I mean, I don't think you shouldn't talk about hot button social justice issues, nor do I think that the right wingers on this site are very smart. But it seems to me that that's pretty frivolous in terms of actually making content that spreads the ideas of radical politics. Because,
I would say definitely limiting.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I would definitely say that limiting content to just I guess it would basically be in engaging in more of a drama approach, which is basically what the right wing on the internet does. Is it makes everything about an us versus them narrative, yes, without ever really getting into any kind of substantive views that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, you can find their views through subtext, but but also these right-wing politics are not really meant to actually inform you as much as to stir up. So that, for what the right is trying to do, that essentially works. But if you're trying to spread leftism using YouTube as a tool, you're limiting it to talking about how much of a dickhead Sargon of Akkad and TJ Kirk are, and fucking everything has to be a video responding to Ben Shapiro. It kind of shoots it in the foot. You have to have part of the reason why I like videos or why I started watching your channel and Anarchopac's channel is because there was a lot in the way of information, especially because I didn't have a lot of access to the classical communist literature.
Yeah,
it was nice to at least get the ideas presented to me in a way that wasn't necessarily just dumbed down.
Yeah.
And I mean, I did go back and read those. I understand, I definitely understand the point that, you shouldn't be telling people that in order to be effective in anarchism that they have to read this book, and this writer.
Right.
But you shouldn't be, but I think that it should also be encouraged to read them, or at least some of that literature, in order to get your own ideas about anarchism.
Right. You can if you do, you need to at least have read it, or at least listen to an audiobook, or hear about some of some of the actual texts who actually have your own opinion on mutual aid or the conquest of bread, whether it's good or not. Yeah, both which I think are good.
And on I guess the topic of books specifically, I mean, what you can do is you can create audiobooks on YouTube. That there is a channel that does that. It's called Audible Anarchist.
Yep.
And I actually think that's a good way to get people engaged, because in the digital world, listening to an audiobook is way easier than reading a physical book for most people, or for a lot of people at least.
Oh, Definitely easier for me. I spend
Yeah.
some time reading text, and I like to read text. I do like to read like a physical book once in a while. Like it's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy reading, but like time-wise, my work schedule doesn't always provide enough time to read as much as I'd like to. And the great thing about something like you just brought up, Audible Anarchism, is yeah, something like that for someone like me who works a job where I can essentially have one earphone in all day.
Yeah.
I could literally just listen to that. Like I could listen to that at work, and like, you know, get access to even more like anarchist literature, because there's so much of it that I haven't read that I really wanted to get around to reading at some point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I actually didn't even hear of them before you just brought them up, so now I'm going to have to check them out.
Yeah, I'd suggest it. I never needed to make use of it because I do read a lot of actual books, I read rather than listen to audiobooks most of the time, but I think you'd find it useful.
That's definitely what I do. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yep. That's definitely what I do at work, as I listen to like the audiobooks. I finally also decided to get like YouTube Premium, because it does have that function of like, if you open up YouTube app, start listening to it, you can have whatever it is, like the audiobooks from Audio Anarchist playing as a background. So I just like,
oh yeah, and then you can close your phone.
Yeah, exactly, and save some battery too. So that's how I've like listened to The Conquest of Bread. They have the Liverbox version of Emma Goldman's like Anarchism and Other Essays, but also like how nonviolence protects the state. And in some Twitter arguments I've been having, especially with like some rebels that call themselves leftists, and one Andrew Yang, a narco-pacifist, like I was saying, okay, listen, no. Just non-violent civil disobedience doesn't always work. Those are tactics we should use first, but cutting out all violent tactics, saying we should never use those as bad optics, is protecting the state. And so, yeah, I like that audio playlist from Audio Anarchists a bunch of times on Twitter.
Well,
yeah.
You know how the old saying goes: if all you got is a hammer, you see every problem is a nail. And if you see non-violent action as the only possible actions that can ever be made or basically for praxis, you're going to view every problem as something that'll be solved by BDS or some whatever fucking boycott, where sometimes a few skulls need to be smashed. Like if fascists are walking through the street, you can't just say, I'm going to non-violently oppose them, and if they start attacking us, we're just going to get beaten.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when, like, okay, that's fine if you're non-violent. What if the other side, like the state, imposes violence on you? Like it was like violence that broke up Occupy Wall Street. And also, sometimes non-violence doesn't work, because certainly the Iraq war protests didn't really stop the Iraq occupation.
Yeah, they didn't. The thing that I found interesting that the book you were talking about, how nonviolence protects the state, points out, is that you have kind of these supposedly successful efforts in nonviolent activism that are held up as the proof in the pudding of how you can have a successful movement that relies only on nonviolence. There's the civil rights movement, Gandhi's struggle for independence in India, and the Vietnam War, which was protested by students, and the United States lost. And he points out, Peter Gelderlos is the author. He points out that all of those examples, violent tactics played an instrumental part. So, in Gandhi's independent struggle, you had people who, instead of using or instead of relying on nonviolence and uh, what Gandhi's movement was doing, they actually organized direct action with a diversity of tactics. One of those people was someone named Bhagat Singh. Um, and India, even today, is not fully independent. It's still economically subject to Britain. So so even if we concede that nonviolence achieved Indian independence, which it wasn't, nonviolence wasn't the only thing used. Even if we concede that, India is still subject to Britain's power in certain ways. Then there's the civil rights movement, where you had armed groups organizing for civil rights. Malcolm X argued for black families to own shotguns, and then the Vietnam War. What defeated America in the Vietnam War was the Viet Cong. It wasn't, although the protests certainly made it harder for the war to be supported. The Viet Cong were the ones who defeated America, not necessarily the protests, anti-war protests. So I found that in particular that he points out in that book pretty interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and I mean, this isn't to say that nonviolent tactics don't have their place, but
right. You should use the diversity of tactics anyway. So along the ideas of like a YouTube anarchist practice, essentially, what would you like if someone was like, I don't know much about like anarchism, what would be some of the channels that you would like recommend to them? Like what are the entry level anarchist channels to recommend, or video series as well? Then what are the intermediate, and then what are the advanced? If we can think of them like that, or if we can think of certain educational YouTubers at least that can do that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what I try to do with my channel. I try to combine introductory material and also more advanced content, where I regularly find videos that are made by people on LeftTube, and I criticize them from my perspective. And for me, that's a way of having a discourse that's not just introducing people to the ideas in a simplistic way, but in discussing them on a broader level, where we can also do things that are maybe more advanced, such as criticize the ideas of others who are nominally in our quote-unquote camp. So, I mean, that's kind of what I try to do with my channel. But in terms of good introductory material, there is he doesn't make videos a lot anymore, but there's the Left Libertarian. He made a lot of good introductory videos, and they're still up, and you can watch them. He has two channels, the Left Libertarian and Left Liberty Left Liberty Appendix. So I'd recommend checking out those. Honestly, Libertarian Socialist Rants isn't bad either for introductory stuff.
I do like Cameron,
and people know about
that. Was my introduction.
Yeah. So and then there's a Narco Pack who talks more about some more advanced concepts in anarchism. I think the problem is that you largely don't have a lot of channels that talk about the advanced stuff. Most of the things that you get are, for instance, NonCompete or Thought Slime, who they make videos attacking right-wing arguments and nominally introducing people to anarchist ideas. But ultimately, they're not talking about anything that's very theoretically rigorous, you might say.
Right.
So I think the problem is that there's a lack of that, and I think more of that needs to be produced.
Yeah, I do agree. I do think that like NonCompete and Thought Slime, who personally I have issues with like those two just like people, but the content that they produce, like Thought Slime, is why I became an anarchist. Is like his Tune Anarchy series. It was the state. That was the last thing to like convince me that it's like, oh yeah, there's problems with that institution. Oh, okay. Since now I have criticism of the state, I guess that makes me an anarchist, because I had all the other boxes ticked. Because like, it was anti-capitalist, it was feminist, then agree with all the other courses of unjustifiable hierarchies that need to go away, and so the state was the last one. So yeah, I do agree that like, and that they can be. I think also it's like there can be a time and a place for those channels or anyone that is an anarchist that's on YouTube to just sit around playing games, because sometimes you can get people into those like space. You can invite them in with like games. Oh, this person is playing video games, and then maybe it's like they dropped something or mentioned something about anarchist content, and that could like be their introductory link to like other channels and other anarchism. So
yeah, sure, yeah.
But plus, there's also like a time and place for like, I just want to be entertained, and hey, this guy is laughing at this guy, or this guy's like poking fun of like this thing. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, YouTube is an entertainment platform,
Sure.
So I think there should be content from anarchist. I mean, I think anarchist content should be entertaining as well as educational. So, you know, that's one of, I think, the weaknesses of Anarcho-Pack's videos is her videos tend to be kind of dry. And, you know, also, even with, you know, if Thought Slime and NonCompete are convincing people of anarchism, I think that's a good thing ultimately.
Sure.
The only thing I would say is I think there needs to be, you know, I would like more in terms of anarchist content on YouTube, and you know, I don't just say that. That's what I try to deliver with my channel, but you know, there needs to be more than just me. Obviously.
Yeah, I definitely think there need to be more channels. Like, I mean, yours was also one of the like first few that I saw on YouTube, which actually made it pretty funny to me when I like first met you. I'm like, oh shit, this is your old channel name was Red and Black Revolutionary. I'm not sure what it is anymore. Is it still Social Revolution?
Yeah, I didn't change it after that. Yeah, it's Social Revolution.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever changed it before in between that or not. But,
nah, there was only the one name change. If there was a second name change, I'd probably be doing a lot worse than, or if there's a second name change, I'd probably be doing a lot worse than I am right now, but you know.
Well, my busy schedule is, I mean, I'm doing a lot better than I ever thought I would with this channel, if I'm completely honest. Like, I never thought, I thought that it was going to be like, at most I'd get like 20 subscribers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
but yeah, definitely.
Go ahead, sorry.
But I mean, definitely something that's not helping my channel is the fact that I work a full-time job and some amount of overtime every week. Which I gotta find. I'm thinking about like trying to cut back my hours somewhat, so that I can do YouTube. But yeah, part of that too is that which I'm gonna plug it just because it happens to be relevant right now. Is I do have a Patreon in the description.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, it's one of those things where
hint, hint, nudge, nudge, give American Anarchist money. Patreon.com/American Anarchist.
You can call me Kristen. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. I was about to mispronounce it.
I've literally been doxxed and don't care anymore. Yeah, I know that you mispronounced it, but I thought you were just going to correct it to Kristen. You are like Christian, American anarchist. And I want people to know that my name isn't Christian.
Right.
It's literally never at any point been Christian. But yeah.
I also have a full-time job, and it's like, and for me, it's honestly, it's like I've been thinking of ways of trying to get more hours, and I've been told to like cut back if they don't need overtime, Jonathan, or it's like Jonathan, they're complaining to me about your overtime. I understand you have a lot to do, but it's like we got to figure out a way to cut it back. But that's only because I'm trying to get as much overtime as I can. It's because I'm financially helping a friend. But other than that, I'm also lazy. I would like sleep until 10 a.m. on the weekends.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I really hate when like 10 hours of overtime in 1 week is just like thrown on my lap. Like, you have to come in for 5 o'clock every day until 3. You have to work 10 hours every day for a whole week, and then you have to work a Saturday. So then it's more like 14 because I have to work until like 11 from like 6. On like that Saturday, and that time of year is coming up again too. It's always like that in the summer because we're understaffed. As much as I hate it, I also can't really say no when I can't afford to not take it.
Oh, capitalism and your like economic oppression on us all, and you forcing us to like work these jobs because of the threat of poverty. Oh, damn you!
Remember how they were we were told, oh, you'll get or was it just me where it's like, oh, you'll get capitalism when you're older, you'll be very conservative. It's like, I've only drifted left since I've gotten my job. My job has only vindicated me that I should hate capitalism.
Hey, the guy who stormed a detention center, ICE detention center yesterday in Tacoma, Washington, at the Northwest Detention Center, he was 69 years old.
Yeah, I know. I read that this morning.
Oh, man.
Actually, I read that yesterday.
What's the guy's name? Because we should remember his name.
It's Will something. I remember it being like William.
I just read about it, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank. I'll pull it up though.
Yes, we're all doing that. And hey, Mabase, I saw you in the chat because like he misses having a full-time job because gig economy sucks. And yeah.
I can definitely say that both the full-time job and the gig economy suck because the most I've ever made on Patreon at any point was like $20 a month. And what the fuck am I supposed to do with $20 a month?
I wish I had a beer. I wish I was making $20 a month. Goddamn.
It's like what am I gonna do? Buy a free 6-pack every month? Hell, at the time I wasn't even 21. It wasn't like that was an option.
That didn't stop you.
No, it just meant that I got a dub every month. Ever try to make $20 of weed last a month? Yeah, those were the good old days. Hell, back then I even felt like I was rolling in it a bit because it was most I'd ever spent on weed.
His name was Will Van Spronson.
That was.
We'll remember you, comrade.
Yeah, I remember it was like Will Van something, and I knew that it had an S at the beginning. I just couldn't remember what that last name was.
The gig economy sucks. I am working with like a workers advocacy group called Working Washington, and that's one of their big campaigns that they have is like a pay up. We got Sunburn yesterday from a gig. Remember, people, it is summertime, so wear sunscreen unless you're in the southern hemisphere.
I have to wear fucking sunscreen almost every time I go outside because I'm very liable to get sunburned.
Oh yeah, I spend every summer covered in sunburns because I'm too lazy to put sunscreen on.
You should put that might lead to skin cancer one day. So you should put sunscreen.
Oh, I know. My mother actually had skin cancer, and I've actually had a cancerous mole removed from my back, like when I was 16.
Yeah, so I'd suggest wearing sunscreen.
Yeah, black people can get
I've just
wow, who could imagine that? That's
well,
Mama say.
Yeah, I know. If you punch a hole in the ozone layer, you're gonna expose everybody to even more UV radiation.
There is that, yes, which is actually why it's a law in Australia. I remember hearing that back in elementary school. There's a law in Australia that you have to put sunscreen on because, like, they also.
I like how the law is you have to put sunscreen on, but then like the law has nothing to say about like the intense pollution of the atmosphere that's causing the planet to heat up. So, don't deal with that. Just fucking make people put sunscreen on.
Yeah, but I mean also regardless too, just because of the fact that like, I would think that like because my dad and my brother can basically go a whole summer without ever getting a sunburn.
Mm-hmm.
But I got my mom's fucking Irish as shit skin, and like, yeah, no, I can't get away with it. It takes a little bit longer for me to sunburn than my mother, though. But even then, like my mother has gotten a sunburn from like on a cloudy day before.
Really?
I have heard of that. Yes, I have heard of that. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. Yes, and some people can still get sunburn as well.
You thought it was just nature, but it was me, Dio. Somebody play a Holy Diver. I love the Kill Switch Engage cover of that song.
I do love the Kill Switch Engage cover of that song too. Yeah, it's like I still like the original, but still I prefer Kill Switch Engage. It's just much more heavier.
Yeah, I probably like Kill Switch Engage's cover better because I'm not a big fan of like traditional heavy metal.
Mm-hmm. I still like Rainbow in the Dark a lot and Last in Line.
Like, I can appreciate it. Like, I can appreciate Dio and Black Sabbath, but it's just not really. I'm too far removed.
It's not your thing.
I'm too far removed. Like, I guess generationally. Like, to me, it's like dinosaur music to me. To be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I love listening to dinosaur music when I get the time. Just like.
Dinosaurs would make good roars in metal. Dinosaur roars in metal. That'll be something.
We need T-Rex black metal.
I mean, hell, there are monsters in Gwar and the Gwar ripoff in Lordy.
Lordy is basically like Lordy is like PG.
Oh,
sorry, I was just gonna say Lordy is like PG Gwar basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Although I saw something, I think it was like last year, that apparently like the last original member of Gwar actually died.
I mean, I know the bassist died, and then the singer, I forget his name, but his stage name is Odorous Urungus. He died.
I know literally nothing about Gwar. All I know is that my mother told me that my aunt dragged her to a Gwar concert once.
Wow.
And my mother told me the story of that, so she's like in the mosh pit, or not just outside of the mosh pit, and she got knocked down, and as she's getting up, they're spraying the fake blood, and she sees the blood on like her hands and thinks that like she's severely injured, only to see that they're like spraying fake blood all over everybody.
That's epic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was into Gwar when I was in middle school. But yeah, they're
He should have been a normal kid and gotten into Slipknot by then.
they're an interesting group.
Emos has best music. I won't argue.
I mean, I won't disagree, but I bet Piper will.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of emo. I mean, there's things that I like that could be like put under that umbrella, but I'm generally not an emo fan. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
you're just kind of like new metal, grindcore, and black metal, basically.
I mean, there's other stuff, but
for me, it's like any kind of metal. Just like I'll listen to like most any kind of like a metal. And in high school,
I'll listen to it.
Yeah, but in fact, like in high school, I kind of had that like elitist snobbiness like attitude to like some of those emo bands, but now thinking about it, hey, come on, it's okay for like men to express their emotions, isn't it? And so I gotta like, with that in mind, I'll be willing to like listen to like, what was the one that people were always talking about, like, My Chemical Romance. Yeah, that was the one that people were talking about. So I'll give them like another listen to. Won't guarantee that I'll like it, but I think I'll listen to it. But anyway. So
I know that Piper's not a fan.
What?
I know that you're not a fan of My Chemical Romance.
No, I'm not.
But
yeah,
I personally, I'm personally a fan. I love them, even though like they're kind of like cheesy. But yeah, I've never been like that kind of an elitist. I think I was more elitist towards people who just listened to like pop music on the radio. And I mean, it was near.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, it was near like time where, at least for me, I started to like find less appeal in pop music myself. It was the time where it started to get like the least appealing, and that was really the only time I was ever like elitist about music. But like even in high school, when I started like getting like really into like metal, like I didn't start shitting on rap. I think I didn't start shitting on any rap songs until fucking that fucking one by OT Genesis, the I'm in Love with the Coco one. I think I used to make fun of that one because like the lyrics were so repetitive.
What do you call it? When I was in middle school and I was like a teenage metalhead, I was like, that was around the time that in the club music was still like the big fad. So like that was the time when pop music was possibly at its most vapid in a long time. And so I thought I was like the shit because I didn't listen to that. And I thought I was like super edgy and smart because I didn't listen to stupid pop music.
In fact, actually, Narcopac, man, also kind of mentioned that in like her video of like how she became a better egalitarian or a better person by reading Marx, and so it's kind of, yeah, because like she had that phase as well, but then she just like kind of like realized that like, well, hey, the reason why I like indie rock music because that was just the rock music I was exposed to. That doesn't make me any better than like anyone else. And so yeah, so back to like Anarchist YouTube, and I do agree, Narcopac is like great, even though like her videos are mostly just like dry theory, but she still has also those videos of Anarchism 101 that are coming from her PhD, and I still find enjoyment out of them because I'm learning something that I want to learn more about, and that is entertaining to me, even if it is like not as engaging to others. It doesn't have that edutainment quality of it, or it reaches that engagement level. But hey, she still gets like 20,000 in subs and like quite a bit of views and a lot of followers. So yeah,
I mean, I don't think dry things are bad inherently. But I mean, I guess my point was more, it's a weakness of her content to some extent, but you know, I mean, I don't know that my videos are that much more interesting, but It's also part of a what?
It can also be part of the charm for some people that it's like very dry and like to the point educationally.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, some people, many people love like the aesthetics, the like props and all the costumes and the skits and all. Some people just want the information, and so there's definitely those videos for those people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, my channel definitely is not like the props in entertainment channel. I mean, I basically do fucking I almost said like Sargon of God style live streams where I try and basically mainline like leftist politics as much as I can. But like, you know, for me, I don't think I have the. I think that my strength tends to generally be in the fact that, I was in like a school paper, and I always remember being pretty good at like hosting interviews. Like if I was interviewing someone, I was always able to like have questions and kind of get it, like, so obviously like you have to write it all down if you're doing it for like a school paper, but like, you know, I was able to keep the conversation going and like get a lot out of people, which I think is I mean, that's really what I found my strength to be. I myself, I've put up stuff on YouTube, but where I used to make like these videos on my phone, I just don't have the time to like to do a bunch of takes and you know, because it always took like a bunch of takes to get a really good, like somewhat flowing kind of not disjointed point about something. I mean, and the thing is that does make it easier to have concise points, but I find that my ability to hold a conversation has definitely, it makes it easier. It requires less editing because the amount of time that I spend on a live stream is still less than I spend on a 10-minute video.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
Plus, it's also like much easier. Hey, I just want to do a live stream. Hey, Sunburn Geek, are you free and available? Sure. I haven't said no yet.
Yeah, I intended to do it yesterday, but yeah, like I said, I was getting hammered yesterday. First, I went to like a murder mystery party. There was, which basically was like a LARPing thing where we're trying to like figure out who's the murderer. What's funny is that nobody knows who's going to actually be the murderer until we all read like our last thing. But we didn't read our last thing until we all put in our guesses. I was the only one who guessed correctly.
Never done those. Might be a lot of fun.
But yeah, it's kind of funny because I was also the only one drinking wine there. I drank like a whole bottle to myself of Yellowtail white wine.
Is that one decent? I imagine it's just good for the price.
It's good for the price, I guess. I've never really. I haven't tried many wines. I've pretty much only tried what can come in a box and one of the cheaper bottles of it.
Yeah, for me, I'm not too picky. It's just like I'll just drink it, try it. Just like, I like this, and if I like it, then I'll continue drinking it.
But yeah, so I followed that up by I think in between that I was mostly smoking pot, but then, you know, late I ended up drinking a shit ton of Bacardi.
Is that a whiskey?
It's a rum.
Yeah.
It's
a cheap one too.
I drank it straight, and what's funny too is that so the house that I was at, you know, some comrades in the same city that I live in.
Nice.
A few weeks before of like the same rum, of like the same kind of rum, their partner had basically put like a good amount in like the glass. Like it had to be a good like 3 ounces of Bacardi, and just and went like, oh, told me. I hope nobody thinks this is water. Only for their partner to go until later on, be very thirsty, go like, I'm about to go to bed, and just not realizing it, pick up the glass and drink it all, and not notice it's rum until after they had swallowed it all.
Oh.
And it was kind of funny because while I was drinking it, I had like these tiny sips, and I'm like, how could you drink 3 ounces of this stuff and swallow it all without realizing it's rum?
They must have been really thirsty, I guess.
Well, yeah, but the look on their face, they just kind of looked at me. They're like, "That's not water." I'm like, "Yeah, it was Bacardi."
Must be in the Silver Spice one's period. That's the clear one because
yeah. I'm going to avoid saying their names because they actually have decently prominent Twitter accounts that have been targeted by fascists.
Oh,
so, like, admitting that I know them could either make them a target of people who don't like me, or it could make me a target of people who don't like them. Although I'm assuming there's overlap there already. That's the reason I'm not like saying their names or anything like that, because that could lead to like a potential doxing.
I don't know if I have any enemies yet. I probably do, but thankfully I haven't gotten much of harassment. Other than that one time I posted a meme on Twitter that said "kill all landlords," and then that started the whole week's worth of conversations with liberals.
But the landlords provide the houses.
My only regret for that meme is that I had the caption of "just as Mao taught us," and I'm not a Maoist, and so I was like, but oh well.
All right, I'm thinking I think, are we done with the anarchist praxis? I'm thinking of wrapping up points about that and moving on to the next subject.
That's fine with me.
I'm trying to be somewhat casual with this. It's not like a full-on interview, as I prefer that over like a strict interview kind of forum, which is why I don't do like purely interview kind of stuff on my channel.
Right.
So let's get to radicalizing liberals, or I'm assuming that that's just referring to radicalizing some liberals, because I don't think you can radicalize all liberals.
I kind of learned that, but I already also know of like some liberals, some of which who I'm friends with, who are just like, okay, they seem to be firmly in liberalism, and so they're not going to like. I don't think it'll be a waste of time to try to radicalize those liberals further, but like. I mean, and I kind of have to like also personally figure out at what point I gotta like not bother discussing this any further with like my brothers or like some of my coworkers, because if they're gonna keep on repeating, but there's always going to be hierarchies, and it's like, okay, don't bother.
Right.
Oh yeah, it's a pointless. Like at that point, it's literally just a pointless conversation. And something that like my like very much conservative grandmother does is that when I decide I don't want to talk about like politics after that point because I find it a useful conversation, I'm told that I'm just afraid of new ideas and that I should be willing to have political discussions even if the other person isn't going to change their minds even a little bit. And it's like, what the fuck do you think the point of a political discussion is? It isn't like, it isn't just like an ice cream flavor where yes, you can get into a pointless debate about which flavor's better.
Mhm.
And I'm willing to get into like debates like that, like completely for like jokes, because ultimately it doesn't matter, because everyone knows chocolate's the best.
And
No,
pineapple belongs on pizza.
But I mean, it's the fact is, because it's inconsequential,
Right.
you know, I don't have to try and convince anybody of anything, and you get into like arguments, and it's really, you're talking about why you like something. Like,
The
I
Last
can talk
Jedi was
about
a great
these-
Star Wars movie, and Return of the Jedi was a great Star Wars movie too.
I
will die on those hills.
I watched what was it? What was it? Not The Last Jedi, the one before it.
Force
You
Awakens.
literally said it. Yeah. I saw The Force Awakens, and I actually really liked that. Yeah.
I need to rewatch
But
it.
yeah, ultimately, that's something inconsequential, and
Right.
basically, my grandmother thinks that talking about politics is talking about something inconsequential, and it's like, no, the reason I don't want to have this conversation is because it's inconsequential, and if you're not going to change your mind on it, I've already chosen how I feel about you.
Yes. Mhm.
It's like, it's like, I've gotten my grandmother to reconsider certain things in the past, and I only ever really talk about politics when I think I can get her to change her mind on something based on evidence.
Mm.
But I also know that no matter what, my grandmother's always going to lean on the personal responsibility and welfare. Welfare is holding blacks down, actually, and making them dependent on the government. It's like, okay, Grandma, I don't want to hear your racist bullshit anymore.
Yeah.
How can you say it's racist? It's just an opinion. You've met my friend. She's brown. Oh, like, you don't have health care, but do you have the N-word?
Yeah, I did see that in the chat.
Yeah. I just saw that in the chat, which, by the way, I've talked to Mabase before. Like, he's really cool.
Oh yeah, he defended me on like Twitter as well. So he's really cool. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I find it funny. It's like, oh, you don't have health care, but do you have the N-word? It's like, I could go to Britain and say the N-word and not get arrested. It's a matter of that you shouldn't. The good old days when they were dependent on masa. Yeah. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't
know.
It's pretty sure it's supposed to be massa, because
it is masa.
He's referring to slavery. Like he's saying like, so basically, like, it's bad that black people are dependent on welfare, but like, we're not going to address the fact that
that they literally were enslaved for like half a millennium. Like, when you think of how long like they were enslaved, it's not like their problem isn't welfare. Their problem is that they haven't been repaid for like all the damage done to their communities and for being like removed from their land to become slaves for some fucking bougie men who wanted to rebel against the British government.
Yeah, and then, like, even if you propose the idea of like reparations, or if that's the one,
Reparations.
that's the word, reparations. Some conservatives are like, oh man, what? They're fine now. Why did we have to like do all that? And it's just like, dude, man.
Well, yeah, it's
conversations like that.
Well, also the idea too that like there's any such thing as equal opportunity in capitalism.
Yeah.
And like that is just a pure fucking conservative pipe dream / like propaganda point. Because it depends. Because like basically more conservative people who are working class, like I think are more likely to actually believe that to be the case. But like the conservative people who are already like rich bougie assholes, like they're just laughing their way to the bank because they got the because they're not the white middle class, the white working class, like blaming another part of the working class for their problems. Like, you fucking idiots! You think that we got you to think that black people and Mexicans are the reason or are the reason you're poor.
Yeah, and some revolution that was a bunch of rich guys telling another group of rich guys, "Fuck off."
Well, yeah, you get
we got our country.
You get right-wing conspiracy theorists who like where you get Alex Jones, where they start talking about like these new world order conspiracy theories. It's like, no, you're literally part. You know that you're part of the whole thought. You're part of the thought control that you're talking about, right? Like the thought control is actually like a very right-wing thing that's going on, and it's being done through propaganda to convince people that the status quo is correct, or even that an active regression in social policy would actually be better, which is, it's an inaccurate view, and it's one that very much does serve the already powerful.
Yeah.
And people like Alex Jones specifically, like that side, like right-wing conspiracy theorists, quite literally like hold up that system, and part of the way that they do it is by blaming other groups. It's not the Illuminati. It's the U.S. government.
The deep state.
It's not the deep state. It's just the fucking state.
Yeah. I saw a bumper sticker of the fluorides in the water or something or another, and it was an InfoWars bumper sticker, and it's like, wow, even in Seattle there are like people like this.
The fluoride in the water's turning the freaking frogs gay.
Then I also sat next to someone who was watching a Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Sutherland stream.
Ugh.
You thought it was the black, but it was me, the billionaire. I mean, pretty much.
Yeah, it is.
Like, it's kind of funny. It never took me much to get to that conclusion because I always knew people of color, even when I was like a right-wing like idiot. Like, I knew people of color, and like I would know a lot of like Latino and Latinx folks, like in general, specifically. So like when Mexicans and quote unquote illegal immigrants started getting blamed, that's around the time where like my politics started, where I started to actually think about my politics. Because I was like, something here doesn't sound quite right, because I've known these people all my life, and I know that they are definitely not responsible for like my family's poverty, especially since they live in that same fucking poverty themselves, if not worse.
So to bring it back a bit to the topic of like radicalizing liberals, like I definitely have to like figure out like at one point to like I just try to stop, because I'm a baby anarchist, so I have not like been burned out by having the same argument over and over and over again. And also I need to like read up to like know how to debunk all of the like oldest shit like anti-anarchist like arguments for the past 150 years. But like have you two like attempted like to radicalize liberals, or how, if you do that, how do you go about that?
Oh my god, that was literally like almost all I did when I first started this channel. Like I had liberals on all the time. There's still some people who are like liberals that like I'd have on the channel pretty much any time, but like I'm definitely not like trying to like convert, or not convert was a bad choice of word, but like I'm definitely not trying to like convince every liberal at this point.
Yeah.
I think, like, I'm willing to have some on to talk about social justice, but I usually try to use social justice as like a very jumping off point, like a really radical form of social justice that says, well, it's not just this, it's not just this. You're not going to solve this by legislating it away. You have to like take direct action. You have to be a radical, and you have to be okay with being unpopular, because radical change has always been unpopular.
Yes.
But it's the only way change has ever been fucking made.
Right, because it is radical action that does spur legislation to actually finally be passed.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, Mabase said the farthest I have ever gotten people is to Social Democrat. I think I only have one person I ever like confirmed like radicalized, and that's like my cousin, who's also gay. So, and
I think
it was also my cousin's family that I was out with yesterday at the murder mystery party thing. So it was someone who I thought was pretty open to radical politics.
Oh yeah, there's that. So, Piper.
Yeah, I don't try to radicalize people, quote unquote, because radicalization is a matter of one's life experiences. What's going to convince somebody of radical politics, what's going to convince them of anything rather, is it's not usually going to be persuasive argument. It's going to be life experience. So I'm not usually under the impression that I can convert anyone to anarchism. But what I do try to do is, if there is political conversation around me, I try to inject certain points to get people thinking about certain subjects. So, I mean, what you can do with conversation is you can introduce, points to people that will make them think about the subject differently. That's what I try to do, and that's more or less something that you can do in your everyday life when people talk about politics. So I think that's basically the best.
That's basically what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I've been like doing now, and it's like whenever like on Friday, I actually was at a bar, just because like one person came back from Africa and another person was leaving the company. Hey, and so I would just listen to the conversation, and then when they're talking politics, I would kind of like interject, like that Boeing crash and that sort of thing. This is why it's just like maybe just like having all the power be with just the people at the top that like. No, even though all of you below, all the engineers and everyone saying that like there's something wrong with this, we'll still like sell it because we have to sell it because we want to keep our revenue numbers up. We don't want to like lose our faith from our stockholders and something like that. So that plane will leave the building and we'll go to the customer, and we're not going to listen to those guys. It would be nice if like maybe there's like democracy at the workplace where it's just like everyone gets to like have the power to like decide on things, like that plane's not leaving the plant because like there's a flaw we have noticed. It'd be nice to that instead of the structures of like most companies has nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of like my therapist is like kind of, I think a bird just flew into my window, but anyway, my therapist is just like kind of a milquetoast liberal, and sometimes when she knows that I write about politics, so sometimes when she starts talking about politics to me, I'll inject points that are kind of critical of the Democratic Party. So
my wife's like Mama said
conversation or two. Like, I've definitely had conversations with my therapist where I started basically, like, getting anti-capitalist when I was, like, 17.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen a therapist since I was 18, so...
Yeah.
Which is something I really need to fucking see, but... I have shit for healthcare.
Yes.
I've also got, like, fucking 4 cavities that I can actually feel with my tongue that I can't go and get filled because of my shit healthcare.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So I remember I have a friend that also has that problem too, and like needs like $300, and just like I'll do the best I can, like share around her like links and social media and stuff like that, which is what I've been doing. Mapase has like a question. My wife is sliding into Marxist Leninism via Thomas Sharka. Should I be trying to fight this? Chikara. Sorry.
Thomas Sankara.
Thomas Sankara. Should Mapase be trying to fight this?
I don't know. I mean, if it was me, like, I'd probably... I don't know. I'd probably try to challenge the person on certain things. But, you know, once again, it's more or less people's life experiences that are going to convince them of things. So I don't know that there's so much that you can do personally. I don't know. I mean, I've kind of been in that situation before, like, you know, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. If you feel like you have to challenge that in some way, I would say do it. But, you know, if you don't, then you don't have to.
Yeah. I'll mention this one that like American Johnson, he's a self-identified anarchist, and his girlfriend Luna Oy is a Marxist-Leninist, and so hey, they get along, and then that will be the question is like how important is your relationship with your wife is versus how important you feel it is to try to like convince them to not be a Marxist Leninist, be an anarchist instead. So that's the balance act you gotta like ask yourself: is it worth it to do that as well? And honestly, like I don't know if I have. Okay, no, I've like talked to in real life a Marxist before, and maybe I've have like interacted with other Marxists before in real life that I don't know about. I do kind of like separate my interactions with like other leftists offline versus like online. Like online, Twitter's a cesspool, so there's that. So I do kind of like view tankies and MLs differently from my interactions with them on Twitter. Mainly whenever they harass like my trans friends or are just being bigoted to like other people, I say screw those people. But in real life, I'm not going to suggest that there needs to be any left unity, especially not online. We don't need left unity. There's plenty of anarchists that we can converse with online that we don't need to like unite with like other leftists. But in real life, we can work together on certain issues that we both agree on, and we can, if we're during the discussions on other issues that we disagree on come up, we can have debates about those things or discussions about those things. But for real life practice, we can work together on at least the issues that we do agree with. But if my partner is like an ML, and then that will be my thing. I'll have to like weigh the options of like how much do I value the relationship versus how much I value my activism, and is it worth it to try to convince my partner?
Yeah, I mean sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to say, so I've never been in that specific situation where someone is becoming an ML, but usually in my experience, I've had to, I've just like cut off relationships because I've had a girlfriend like going right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It hasn't been my experience, at least. I mean, recently I've mostly just dated people who have like basically the same politics I do. Not like the exact same, but like basically people with anarchist politics.
Yeah.
Where before where before it was never really any of, like, I never had any boyfriends that did, but I was also at the time perceived very much as a cis male. So
Yeah.
and
For
that was the
me,
way I had contextualized my own relationships too. So
for me personally, I don't know. Like, I can barely like be friends with quote unquote Marxist Leninists. Like at a certain point for me, the bullshit meter goes off like far too many times, and I don't. It's not really who I choose to surround myself with. So
right.
I can't really see myself getting into a relationship with someone who's a Marxist Leninist or whatever. But like, that's me personally. I don't know. I don't know.
Jamie J said in the chat, "Hi, Jamie. By the way, my policy on dating: only anarchists need apply." I say that's a good policy.
I mean, I guess that's kind of my effective policy. I mean, I don't necessarily. Like, that's not necessarily a rule that I always follow, but in practice, that's kind of how it goes down anyway.
And for me, it's like I haven't done much of like dating in any way, but for me, where my politics are now, I don't see myself like dating a right-wing person at all.
Well,
Because like and I can definitely see how some people will end friendships and relationships because someone's politics are drifting further right. And so but I can't speak to the experience of like dating someone or being in a relationship with someone who is an ML or specifically. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm not.
yeah,
I can't see myself being in a relationship with someone who's like, yeah, I mean, fucking too many immigrants. We need to get rid of them. Like, I don't know.
no, I want to like go down to the concentration camps and just like free those immigrants. Or if the ice raids happen in my neighborhood, I want to like stand up and like say, hold on, wait a minute. They have their rights. They have a right to the lawyer. They have the right not to speak and all that sort of thing. So, and hopefully stay safe out there if the ice raids are coming to your neighborhoods. But they won't come to the ghettos. My friend kind of like said, yeah, those ice people are not coming to the ghettos. The gangs will make sure of that.
oh, that was a good point. Oh, I get. Oh, that's who was talking. Yeah, I'll send Miguel an invite. I just assumed Miguel was busy because Miguel almost always says no whenever I invite him.
I haven't talked to him in like. I've only talked to him kind of on Facebook. I haven't talked to him in a long ass time.
But yeah, with Mabase also brought up something. It's like, I love her and we have 2 kids, but the state bad memes are kind of annoying.
I mean, that's you can definitely say is like, hey, this kind of annoys me. So like, if you and like, I would like it if you would like kind of like tone that down or stop, and you can have that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have a lot invested in the relationship, so I don't know, maybe just kind of like make it clear that you can agree to disagree, but like neither of you necessarily has the right to constantly be bringing those things up. I don't know.
And we're all anarchists, but we can't tell you what to do. Of course.
That's true.
Okay. Oh, by the way, just a quick aside, happy International Non-Binary Day. So, all you non-binary people and MBs out there, be proud of yourselves.
I have no idea when these holidays are.
I didn't know until like today, and it became a hashtag. This is one of the few like trending Twitter themes or trends that I actually is for me. I was like, okay, I actually like that, because yesterday it was about Scarlett Johansson, which I was like, oh god, what did she say?
Oh, did Scarlett Johansson say something stupid or something?
Yes, she said she would.
She's like a fucking vaccines cause autism mom. So like,
Hello everybody.
Hello, Miguel.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I haven't talked to you in like a long ass time.
I know. Only tidbits and pieces.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Yes, indeed. I heard Scarlett Johansson's name. What did she do this time?
Yeah,
I
what did
think
she do?
I gotta like pull up the quote or just like Google search that Scarlett Johansson, because I think she said that she can play anything: a woman, a man, a tree.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, but I don't think of Scarlett Johansson as an actress. I mean, honestly, if Thora Birch hadn't destroyed her own career, well, technically her father ruined that career for her.
Wait, I was thinking about something else. I was thinking about another person when I said the thing about the vaccines causing autism.
You're thinking of Jenny McDermott.
Yeah, that's who I'm thinking of. Thank you. Sorry.
No, Jenny McCarthy. Jenny McDermott is
Jenny McCarthy. Yeah, Jenny McCarthy is the one. Yeah, she used to be a Playboy person, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's who I was thinking of. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that Scarlett Johansson is any more like I don't know. I can't imagine her opinion is any more valuable, considering that like she voluntarily takes like whitewashing roles in movies. So like I don't know. She
Ghost in the Shell was not a good movie. Yeah.
Even then, and I say this as someone who's quite the movie aficionado, and I've seen her in action. Honestly, she's not that great of an actress. She has memorable roles, but that's only because she's often joined with other superior actors and actresses.
Yeah, I don't know, like a fucking black, like her performance in as Black Widow in the Avengers was really bland. Like if it was just a movie about her being Black Widow, it would have been insanely boring. The only like she
that one's
like,
coming.
She's like, I mean, if that is coming, that's going to be horrible. But fucking like her performance was just not remarkable at all as Black Widow. Like I have to say, like it seems like the only reason that she was cast as Black Widow is so they could put her in a latex suit and fucking have like dudes oogle her ass or whatever the fuck. So,
oh, indeed, it's fan servicing. That's the new du jour for the now ever popular superhero films.
Yeah, it seems like it.
And I found like a news article. For some reason, I got like a French one or something like that, but I got translated. Basically, Scarlett Johansson defends her right to play anyone because, yeah, there was that like time she was going to be cast as like a trans man.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
and that was by the same director who directed the live action Ghost in the Shell. And I saw that movie in the movie theater, and I was really pissed off because
why is that director like dedicated to like whitewashing things? Like what the fuck? Like
I don't know. I don't know. It's because like as I watched Ghost in the Shell, the live action one, I thought that like, okay, you at least gave her a different name. She's not Makoto Kusanagi, she's Mirren Killian. But then in the third act of the movie, it was revealed that no, Scarlett Johansson's character is Makoto Kusanagi. Her ghost was from a Japanese girl that they put in the
apparently fucking like they had the Japanese actor play the character for like the beginning of the movie, and then when she becomes a robot or whatever, like she gets Scarlett Johansson's face. It's such like bullshit.
Yeah, it was a shit show.
You know, in all honesty, the interesting part is that Hollywood is very, contrary to what most people believe about Hollywood being the super liberal place, Hollywood is very ass backwards in comparison to even TV series and foreign cinema and even independent cinema here in the States. Because if you look at other movies, they seem to be a lot more open to the idea of having much more gender non-conforming people and a lot less cis people, and not make it look like a Scarlett Johansson scandal. I mean, for example, recently we've had more transgender representation. For example, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the TV show Pose.
I'm not.
Well, this is a show that's on FX that came out last year with Ryan Murphy and Stephen Canales and Brad Falchuk, and it was the TV series is still running at its second season currently, and it is right now the only TV series with a full cast of trans women of color.
That's cool.
And I know of a lot of people have been complaining about how we don't have enough representation, but yet in all the circles that I've been hanging around with, and even on the internet, nobody talks about this show enough. and yet it is the perfect show that we've been waiting for a very long time, because it's about time that we have more representations like that. I mean, and also we've also had another movie that came out a while ago from the director Sean Baker called Tangerine, about two trans women of color who were sex workers in their day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm.
That was really particularly real interesting and well-rounded. It didn't feel voyeuristic or exploitative.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that we're living in these kind of times now, that these representations are slowly creeping in, and for all the good and right reasons. Not always perfect, but it's definitely coming on the right track. Whereas when you look at Hollywood, a lot of this stuff is somehow doesn't even seem to exist, and then when it does, it always exists in some rather tragic or rather problematic way, that almost to the point where it turns you off and you don't even want to watch it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, because I truly do believe that these past couple of years we have finally, but slowly, have had better representation. But Hollywood is still very ass backwards when it comes to even remotely any decent representation. Because if you look at TV series and independent cinema, it's getting a lot better, and thankfully it is.
And unfortunately, I don't think like the major studios for major Hollywood movies are going to include more of that representation until, who knows, until it becomes profitable to do so in China. And so, thank you, capitalism.
But you see, I mean, I don't disagree, but I think, I mean, at least in this country, even if it wasn't the issue with China, we would still find an excuse to have cis and het, actors and actresses take roles that shouldn't even be theirs in the first place.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, they're still they're still whitewashing characters of color. So I don't have any expectation. Like even in a post-racial quote unquote society, they're still whitewashing characters of color and being defended for doing so. And then white people are still throwing up, getting up in arms about characters that were formerly white being recast as people of color. So I don't given that we're still at that level, I don't have any expectation that in a society like ours, where plenty of people still believe that trans people are just mentally ill weirdos. I don't have really any faith that they're going to anytime soon. There's going to be any representation for actual trans people in media. I mean, gay representation for representation for gay people even is that's if you go 10 years ago, that gay representation in media was horrible. It was basically just any gay character was just the effeminate friend of a female character. So I don't really have any faith that anytime soon that we're going to see actual trans representation in Hollywood features.
I like what JBJ said in the chat. We need more trans people playing cis folks for their own genders and generating cis tiers. I do agree with that. And black mermaids are valid too.
Yeah.
Honestly, I find it really funny, the whole thing going on with Black Ariel, because these are the same kind of people that will defend Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
But they'll defend Scarlett Johansson and basically they'll be like, oh, it's all right for her to play this character and this character, but don't you dare touch Ariel.
Yeah.
It's okay, for one, Ariel's a mermaid in the fucking Caribbean, and people there are dark, and two, it is literally impossible for a mermaid to be white because the ocean is filled with salt and white people hate seasoning.
I did retweet that meme. Yes.
You know, I'm not exactly surprised that a lot of people are very offended by the suggestion
Oh, I'm
that.
not surprised. I'm just like baffled, I guess.
Not even that personally, to be honest with you, because let's be honest here. If anything embodies the overbearingness of whiteness, aside from progressive rock, it's Disney.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, like,
Calling me out there with the progress.
well, I mean, like, look at old Disney movies. Like, look at Dumbo, for instance. Like, with the fucking racist crows. Like,
Yeah.
Wasn't one of them literally named Jim?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Like,
jeez.
yes. One of them was named Jim. I'm pretty sure. Yes.
It was in the 1940s too, or around that time. Yeah.
I don't really watch Disney movies. I don't waste my beautiful eyes and releasing CO2 onto the air to watch Disney. I don't care for Disney. I just know a lot about Disney because we live in a country where you can virtually not even escape it.
Yeah.
You know,
They will just buy all the other entertainment because they're like that.
I mean, Disney's involved in a lot of projects, and that includes pornography, contrary to what most people believe.
What the fuck? Wait, tell me about that. I want to hear about this.
Well, actually, I don't think most people understand that Disney is a very powerful company. They have their hands on a good chunk of entertainment.
Mhm.
I mean, they might not explicitly tell you that they're in pornography, but I'm sure their shareholders and probably themselves through other names probably do have some form of distribution of pornography. Because pornography is a very corporatized institution these days.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these days, sure, you might look at a lot of the logos for like a lot of pornography on DVD or on the internet. I mean, who honestly buys pornography on DVD or Blu-ray these days? Except for the people who are more invested in
I
the
gotta
70s.
make sure it's in HD.
I mean, look, I get if you're buying pornography from the 70s and the 1980s because that stuff was more like movies in comparison to what we have today. Whereas today it's more skits.
That's like 3-minute video.
Like the 1970s and 1980s pornography were literally
The
movies.
one thing I missed about 1970s and 1980s pornographies were were like the set of pubes that you could like pick with an Afro pick.
Yeah, basically. I mean,
Like that needs to be more normalized. Like, why did we ever go away from that trend?
honestly,
I don't know.
I've tried finding any real reason into why. I haven't really had much luck. I think I'm just speculating here.
I think
Honestly,
part of it is that we fetishize youth and we associate hairlessness with youth.
It could be that. I don't wanna really determine that's the sole reason without evidence.
Yes.
Whereas, when it comes
I don't
to
think it's the sole reason, but I think it's one contributing factor.
Oh, it's definitely a contributing factor, but heterosexuality in terms of its pornography is a bit more difficult in terms of its tracking its history. Whereas with something that's a lot less heterosexual, it's a little more easier.
Mhm.
Like for example, if we were to study non-heterosexual porn, let's say gay porn, for example, gay porn has a lot of fetishization of youth in itself, and
Oh, definitely.
I know that's not a very thing. I know that's not something we like to admit, but if you look at a lot of history, there's a lot of emphasis on youth, big bodies, chunky, well, not so much chunky, big muscular bodies or very skinny ones. I mean, the twink, for example.
We need more chubby bodies. We need to normalize guys who look more like Daniel Cormier than look like they came out of a fucking Dragon Ball episode.
But see, the thing is, the funny thing is if you look at gay history, a lot of what you see today in terms of like muscular bodies and all that stuff, that was actually seen as very countercultural decades ago.
Right.
That was seen as a very countercultural thing to do back in those days, and that was a lot of what was seen as the architecture of gay culture. If you look at a lot of older magazines from back then, although a lot of that stuff was illegal, you tend to notice this pattern. There was an interesting book that came out this year. I forgot the name of it. and where they were talking about modeling and men, and they got like a ton of rave reviews. And I remember one of the reviews was from a prominent like LGBT historian, Leila Roop. I still have to pick it up. Maybe someday I'll come back to this conversation and explain it.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms, I'm not disagreeing that fetishization of youth is a real thing. It's always been a thing throughout history. I think we just tend to notice it more now than ever before, because now it's much more in your face than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you can't virtually, it's virtually, you can't escape it either. You see it in movies, you see it in modeling magazines, you see it even in propaganda posters, advertising, and so much other things. You tend to notice you see a lot more younger people. You don't really see older people. This is especially true if we look at it across gender lines. We mean, if you look at, for example, women, you don't often see a lot of older women, for example, in entertainment, at least in America and here in the United States, very often in comparison to younger women.
Yeah,
it's
usually once a lot of younger women in the entertainment industry start to age, their careers start to decline because they're not like selected for as many roles, because for some reason, well, it's more than just some reason, but we don't, for reasons that we can go over. Basically, women who are like, for some reason, or we don't want to see women in or at least like the mainstream. It doesn't want to show women that are older. Like we view older women as like gross, when really they're not. It's the natural human thing to age.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, I mean, I don't disagree with your point. I think your point is still very valid, and it still holds very true in a good chunk of the entertainment industry, and even in society as a whole. But I would also argue that I tend to notice that when you're older, a lot of younger people tend to not just like you in general. It's in certain subcultures, in certain communities, it tends to be an ongoing problem that you tend to notice. For example, and this is especially true in the LGBT community, where if you're an older gay man, and I can't really say much for lesbians because that's not really a circle I'm in, being that I'm a man. But I noticed.
I will say with a lot of older lesbians, there are a lot of TERFs.
I mean, of course, you'll always find bigot jerks in any movement. I mean, there's younger TERFs as well. I mean, for every Jermaine Greer, there's a Kathy Brennan.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, see, because the thing is, I think one tends to. I mean, especially because when you're younger, you tend to not realize that you don't really look at these issues in a much bigger picture. And I tend to often notice this when I talk to a lot of younger leftists, especially when it comes to the issues of history. I don't think they tend to look at the broader context. I mean, we always like to talk, especially in LGBT circles, when you tend to talk about the issues of the AIDS crisis. We always talk about how we lost a generation of LGBT people, but yet the people that remain, a lot of young people tend to dismiss them. Like we tend to have a weird clash between the older ones and those younger people, and I always thought that was rather strange because you tend to notice it. And there's been plenty of articles that have been coming out in the last couple of years on this matter. And there was an academic article that came. I read it on the Monash University site. I forgot. Someday I'll link it. About ageism in the LGBT community, and how certain people tend to look at each other in certain ways, especially when it comes to older. For example, for older gay men, a lot of younger guys tend to view them as predatory, which I always thought was rather messed up, because if we look at because that's a lot of these guys probably heard that a good chunk of their lives about how they were often perceived growing up. And remember, 30, 40 years ago wasn't that long time ago, we might not have existed, but they knew damn well the struggles that they had to endure.
I mean, 30 or 40 years ago, that's just like our parents' generation. So it's within one lifetime. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, I've spoken to a lot of older gay men, and they've told me the things that they had to endure growing up and when they came out, and when they started living their own lives as as real as they had to live it. And I often noticed that while they often had a lot of good times, they were not really all that crazy about talking about the bad times, because when they spoke about it to me, it was very bad. And I could definitely see where it's coming from, because I was a kid of the 90s and the early 2000s. So I knew that throwing nasty slurs that they had to endure, well, along with the violence, was not something necessarily new that I saw and endured.
Right.
So if I had to endure that crap growing up, I can imagine it them going 2 or 3 times worse than me.
Oh yeah, I mean, as someone too who actually has been like assaulted in like homophobic attacks, the fact that I've had to deal with it, I can't imagine what older gay people had to go through when it was much less acceptable than it is now.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, and there's also the interesting part about it, because every time I ask and I talk to them, there was always things that, we look at it today and you're like, wow, things have changed. Maybe not entirely, and I don't want to delude ourselves either to thinking that, which is something I think a lot of LGBT organizations make the mistake of overstating, is that just because certain things have gotten better does not mean that as a whole it's gotten better.
Yeah, it also does not mean that like you can't that progress pendulum can't go backwards.
Right, exactly.
It's funny you mentioned that.
It's much more like a pendulum than it is like a straight line. Almost all basically we found that or I heard something recently that apparently there's less people now who support the LGBT community than when gay marriage first was allowed, and it's because as they've started to understand that trans people are a thing, like transphobia is an issue, is also like it's making people who it's making people who once said that they supported LGBT rights not support it as much because because they can't get past as long as bigotry is still there, there's always a chance that you can go backwards on progress.
Absolutely. Actually, funny thing you mentioned that. Well, I can't really speak on the transgender issue on this, at least in this particular context. There was recently GLAAD released a study. They had a sample of over 2,000 people, I believe, in which they began to notice a small trend of people beginning to have less supportive and a bit more negative views of the LGBT community. And this was something they released this year, not so long ago. And I've always wondered, because one of the tricky things about these kinds of statistics is often, because remember, they're mostly based on questionnaires, and questionnaires can go in many places and it can be interpreted in many ways, especially when the results are not always consistent. That's the tricky thing about questionnaires. But if we're to take this work that GLAAD did, I'm not exactly surprised that such negative views have begun to come into fruition again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it definitely doesn't surprise me either. It's like it's something too that like living as like part of the LGBT community, like the bigotry against LGBT community and certain like views that a lot of people would have thought had changed like are actually coming back. It's like, yeah, as an LGBT person, it's like imagine my shock, only you're not shocked. You're about as shocked as Paul Joseph Watson was when he would say, "Imagine my shock."
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Well, imagine I'm not that shocked.
I mean,
imagine my shock.
I mean, but see, the thing is, when I let me crack my breath. Okay.
You're like, I gotta recover from that real quick.
Right?
That got triggered by Paul Joseph Watson.
Indeed. Okay, so what was I gonna say? Ah, yes. Okay, so with this whole situation with Vlad, and I'm not being surprised. I'm on it, and this is also the thing that I've always been rather weird about when it comes to issues of questionnaires and statistics and how we notice trends.
Oh yeah,
Um,
statistic collection too. Like no matter what method you use, it's always going to have some sort of flaw in its collection.
oh, no doubt. I mean, we are human. Statistics is a human construct. To take a bit of wording from the sociologist Joel Best.
Oh yeah, if there's one thing that I learned from taking an advanced placement statistics class, it was that statistics can actually be like statistics themselves will always be like flawed and not perfectly accurate.
Oh, I agree. But I'm not so much interested in questioning the methodologies that Vlad is using in this particular issue. That's a whole different conversation for another day. But I am interested in making a bit of a commentary on the attitudes change. I mean, I say that I'm not particularly shocked for two reasons. One, I mean, remember, we're under the Trump administration,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I think we tend to fail to acknowledge is that
But gay issues are fixed. Didn't you know that? The homophobia doesn't exist anymore. It's just old hicks in the old hicks in trailer parks that are homophobic.
but
They're
you
not
see,
real people.
but see that's the thing that I think we fail to understand is that we when it comes to the issues of homophobia, we tend to assume that it's only a
Part of what I
specific group
brought
of
it up.
people. You know, like I remember before the whole gay marriage thing, and this was a major controversy a couple of years ago about how like there was especially in California. I remembered that there was a proposition that was attempted to be proposed,
Yes.
and that certain and a good chunk of the black community at the time opposed it, and some people in the LGBT community lost their damn minds over it. And one most famously was Dan Savage, where he practically ranted about how he was sick and tired of being told that it's only a specific certain amount of white people that were largely against the progress of LGBT people, that we need to acknowledge that it was the black community. But the thing is, though, that first and foremost, this statistic was majorly flawed, and secondly, this also tends to erase the nuances between the black community and the actual attitudes that they hold against LGBT people. And I always tend to stress this, and I also caution very heavily because I know it has become in certain elements of the white gay community to start ostracizing and penalizing very heavily people of color
Mm.
in terms of the issues of LGBT issues.
Right.
Even though that some in the community tend to neglect the fact that even when this was supposedly true, they also tend to neglect two things. One, the vast majority of people in power who are able to make such policy changes are still overwhelmingly white,
Yes.
male, and Christian, and
Yes.
they still have a lot of major power in this country.
Yep.
And the second part is that there was another statistic that was released that while okay, I'm specifically aiming the black community because this was how the statistic was made. I have problems with that, but that's a different argument for another day. Where while there was a vocal um, opposition to the LGBT community from the black community, when it came to the issues of policy, they actually were not very much for that. In fact, it was the opposite. A lot of them were not even for that to begin with. They might have their qualms, but they weren't, in terms of policy, they were not for that. So, you but the thing is, I also have to caution is that it is easy to blame, for example, the black community, especially because it's become such a fashionable thing, especially when it comes to LGBT issues, which is why a lot of people of color and a lot of black people tend to have a very rather difficult tension here. Because again, there's still gay black people, there's still gay trans people, you know, and But they're not the only community that tends to get given a lot of crap, because Latinos tend to get a lot of crap from it too, or Latinx, however people decide to make the term these days.
I tend to just use both as like a kind of slash, because I think Latinx refers specifically to like American, or not American, but like people born in like I think it refers to like people who were born in like the United States but are of like Latin American descent, where I've heard Latino is still like how you refer to people of Latin American descent. I don't really know, so I just use them both because I think that both of them get roughly the same point across, and neither of them are slurs. So,
I mean, I agree. I mean, but at the same time, I can also see the argument that some people would try to make that the Spanish language is very heavily gendered, which I concur with that. I'm not disagreeing with that.
My Spanish teacher, who was from Puerto Rico, actually made that same point.
What? That Spanish is a very gendered language?
It's a very gendered language, and I think he actually said it was I think he referred to it as like an almost sexist language.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that either.
I mean, English is a sexist language as well.
It's also French.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is with Spanish, I mean, remember, when it comes to English and Spanish, especially when I remember one thing when I was growing up, I tend to notice this very early in my when I was a kid, is that I had a habit of using they and them all the time when it came to describing people, because it was just an easier way to describe people without feeling the need to say she, him, or just bring up their name every single time. And I remember that it would piss off all the teachers, because they would be like, "Who's they? Who's them?" And like, you have to specify.
Singular. Yeah, it's like, oh, don't use singular they or them, and it's like, but Shakespeare did. Are you saying Shakespeare didn't know any English?
He invented words.
Because you see, the issue of gendered language is not just strictly, something that is inherently English, but it is something also socialized.
Oh yeah, it's something that in itself is reflected in social values. Like it's not. It's a piece of the. It's the piece of the cis heteronormative pie.
Right.
I mean, as well as the patriarchal pie, but yeah.
I see somebody saying here something about non-Hispanic, about Latin terminology. Non-Hispanic, non-Spanish speakers getting into discourse about Latin terminology.
I mean, I will say I definitely, Miguel, pretty obviously from the name, is of Hispanic descent. And I'm largely deferring to Miguel's authority on it and backing it up with my knowledge of Spanish, which I grew up around like Latino and Latinx people all my life. Like that was largely the neighborhood that I grew up in, that was largely the population, because they also tended to be the poorest of people, and I technically fell under that demographic myself in where I was growing up. But I definitely don't think I have the authority to speak on Latin American issues.
I mean, I come from a Latino family, so that's not really much of the problem. I don't want to assume an authority myself, because I don't have the sufficient sociolinguistic knowledge on the matter. I mean, I did do a bit of research on sociolinguistics when it comes to Spanish-speaking dialect, but again, I only know so much. I speak Spanish near fluently, and I write it near fluently because that's what I practically grew up with.
I write it way better than I read it.
Which is funny, because I always felt like writing was a lot more difficult than reading it.
Well, for me, it's easier to write it because I don't have to pronounce it. I have a hard enough time pronouncing English, thank you.
I'm dyslexic, so and my brother he loves to read, so my brother would be reading the book. But when he comes with a word he never heard in his ear in like every conversation, he will have like a pronunciation in his head, never trying to sound it out loud, but then just move on. And he's likely dyslexic just like me. So when he's in a conversation with another person who also read the same book, it will take him a while before I realize, oh, that's how you pronounce that word. I pronounce it differently in my head. I didn't realize we were talking about the same thing this entire time.
Oh my goodness.
But
Wow.
because I'm slightly dyslexic, that's also why I don't like to read. But which is why, back to the earlier conversation, I enjoy audiobooks.
I also see a lot of books in your background.
Yes, just got that as a birthday gift. I partially read that, haven't read that. That's a manga, the Star Wars manga. Still haven't read it. Haven't read all those. Manufacturing Consent, haven't read that. The New Jim Crow, haven't read that. Haven't read that. What other books do I have around here? Oh, here's my Kindle. There's some books I have read on there.
My great-grandfather has all these books by guys like Mark Levin and fuck it. So with guys
Mark Levin. The philosopher, the racist philosopher from the CUNY College?
Yes,
oh my God.
that guy, Rush Limbaugh. Actually, when I was 13, he gave me a Rush Limbaugh book as a gift, and that just became kindling. I read the whole thing, and I felt like I wasted my time.
Oh my God.
So that's how you were kind of right wing from the beginning, was just because of your family, right?
Yeah, literally because so my mother has never had a good relationship with her family, considering the fact that they are very abusive. However, growing up, I went to see them a lot, so I got a lot of these right-wing ideas just from the fact that this was what my family believed, and I had nothing to challenge it with. But as soon as I had something to challenge it with, it's I kind of just left it behind. But yeah, that was I wouldn't have had right-wing views if my mother had been the only one who raised me. I guess I would have been a liberal at some point, because that's kind of where my mom's politics are. But even then, I think I would have. I think in that case, I would have come across left or become a leftist a lot quicker than I did. And I don't think I would have been a conservative. But yeah, that was kind of how I was a neocon. Because my great-grandfather, the best part is that he has all these books, but he's only read 2 or 3 of them. And he's got this bookshelf of Rush Limbaugh books, all the. I'm trying to think of some other ones. The ones that pop up to me are oh, he has a Newt Gingrich book. And you know what's funny? Even my grandmother thinks Rush Limbaugh's a douchebag. And my grandmother's a Trump supporter.
I mean, Rush Limbaugh's a douchebag regardless of what political spectrum you are.
Yeah, I guess it's true. I guess it's the one thing in this world that's objective, is that Rush Limbaugh's a douchebag.
And remember, douchebaggery is not exclusive to any other political ideology. They're all over the place.
Not.
Oh no, there are definitely people on the left who are douchebags. It's not
Which reminds me, I don't know if y'all saw that dumb article from Spiked Online with those 2 women, Amber Lee Frost, who wrote an article a couple of years ago on current affairs, and some other woman, Anna something, about how they were the anti-woke left.
Oh yeah, I saw that going around on my Twitter.
I saw that thing. The anti-woke left. So,
what did that even mean?
Strasserists.
But what did that even mean, though? What did they mean by that?
I'm guessing it's anti-ID poll left. That same sort of thing. That'd be my guess. I haven't read it though.
I've read it. I was funny because I was on my way home, and I read it, and I was like, wow! All it did was basically reduce everything to the issues of class.
Oh, so that's like it's like the typical shit. Like nothing else matters but the workers'
But
movement,
class.
essentially.
Which
Yeah.
is interesting because not so long ago in Current Affairs, Amber Lee Frost wrote an article about sexism, which I'm just here going, I'm like, what happened here?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, okay, because basically their whole like chip on their shoulder is basically that the biggest issue and the most pressing concern issue here is class, and that they're not trying to reduce the other issues, but to them that class is fundamentally the biggest issue to be pressed about in the American left, which comes off as really tone deaf, considering that across class lines, not everyone's inherently equal.
Yeah.
Right.
And yet, for some reason, you have this cabal of leftists who think that the only real axiom of oppression that somehow matters is only class. I'm sorry, but they're just issues that you cannot explain with just class.
I mean, this is like when fucking Sexizzy years ago was like, it did the whole fucking anti-idful thing and said, oh, we'll get to those after we'll get to sexism and homophobia after class struggle is done.
No, you can do both. You can do all of it. We can walk into.
Well, also the other stuff is completely necessary to get a cohesive, a cohesive class struggle. You need a working class that is willing to work with other people who are who have more melanin than them.
Yeah.
It really, I think that. I must clarify, I'm being flippant here, but I think that the only reason racism exists is because white people are jealous that they don't have melanin.
I mean,
on the class thing, I mean, the thing I think people don't necessarily understand is that argument is actually very old.
Yeah.
It's not a new argument. So the argument that the socialist or workers' movement should be the central movement and everything else is either subordinated to it or is not an issue. It's a very old argument within the left. And that used to be actually, and in many ways still is, the way that most anti-systemic movements see themselves. They see themselves as the central movement, and that started in the 19th century, where you have the development of the socialist workers movement, the social movements, and then the development of nationalist movements, and then of course subsequently women's movements and etc. And these movements always viewed themselves as the central movement. If other movements were to be involved at all, they were to be subordinated to the central movement. So, for instance, if the socialist and workers' movements were going to care at all about women's issues or the issues
I'll be right back.
Nationally oppressed groups, then those issues were going to be subordinated to the workers and socialist movement. And so that resulted in things like the trade unions that were under Socialist Party guidance and the socialists themselves saying that, for instance, women's movements were, petty bourgeois, or, for the middle class. And then there was also the fact that nationalist movements and the socialist movement were competing in the sense that nationalists often wanted to create their own separate state in territory that the socialists wanted to take state power in. So when you have people today saying that class is the major relevant issue and everything else needs to be subordinated to it or thrown by the wayside, it's a very old form of kind of left sectarianism that has existed since the middle 19th century, at least. So it's not, it's not, if it's presented as the anti-woke left or some like new kind of innovative idea, it's not. It's a very old sectarian idea, and what it leads to is sectarianism. It leads to movements instead of working with each other to achieve their general aims, they just fragment and make themselves less effective.
Also known as the Trotskyist problem.
Yeah.
Every minor disagreement leads to a new cell, to the point that I'm convinced that one person had a disagreement with themselves at some point and has made 2 different Trotskyist groups that they're the only member of.
I guess I'm glad I never interacted with a Trotskyist before, or if I have, then I didn't realize it.
They're usually not very pleasant, I have to say.
I will say, with the exception of 2 friends that I have out here who are Trotskyists, one of them being the TM for a campaign that I'm playing in, and the other being the paladin player of that campaign. They've been pleasant, but yeah, generally I find that a lot of Trotskyists are just very pleasant, as well as a lot of MLs.
I mean, Leninoids in general are kind of shit, to be honest with you.
Leninoids.
Yeah.
Oh, Leninoids, okay. Okay.
Brainweed, or gangweed. Alright, so should we move on to our next topic?
I just want to I just want to just briefly go back to an earlier conversation, how most people don't have porn on DVD. I may be the exception, though there are DVD games. But that's because
fuck is it? Wait, hold it up again.
Sweet Home, My Sexy Roommate.
Oh my god.
It's a heroin one.
Shoot me in the face.
I have a lot of them that's in arm's reach. I won't show all of them on screen because there's not appropriate for YouTube. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Hey, if you're a connoisseur, you gotta get them. I mean,
yeah.
All right. So with that, should we move on to the biggest one which I feel like this is the one Geek wanted to talk about the most? Radical imagination of our visions of the utopia future, near future world without coercive, unjustifiable hierarchies.
Yeah, I'm okay with moving to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I think back to radicalizing liberals. I like to think that the best one thing is just I honestly imagine a near future anarchist society to not be too different from how the things are right now. It's just that say all the bills for rent, the water, all this, and charges for food and all these things. We don't really have those things. We don't get the bills for the utilities because that's already just we don't need to do that. Everyone just pitches in, and so I imagine.
Wait. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, that's kind of how I imagine it with how technology currently is. The world, if we are in an anarchist society as opposed to a capitalist society, it would just be not too much different than everything else, except for all the necessary things. We just don't get the bills for those things. And also, maybe the work week would be a lot less, so we can pursue either education, research, or just passion projects of art and entertainment and that sort of thing, and personal pursuits.
I mean, I'd also you brought up the utilities. I also I could imagine too that the way the utilities are run wouldn't in an anarchist society, it wouldn't really be like coal or like our sources of power right now are like greenhouse gases polluting the environment. But remember, what you really need is you need to wear a sunscreen. That needs to be the law. No, but yeah, you know, I would also see that more green technology would stuff that is less pollutant would probably also be pretty invested in if you're thinking of a society that's not based off of cost. Like, it's not based off of somebody trying to make. If it's not based off of profit, I imagine that there wouldn't really be much reason to not like install more solar panels, have more windmills and whatever. Or not windmills, wind turbines.
Right.
Windmills don't produce any energy. But,
Right.
But yeah, I imagine like more wind turbines, hydropower, stuff that is less destructive to the environment would probably be something that we'd value a lot. Because, well, I imagine the human cost would also be taken much more into consideration, where in capitalism, the human cost is basically never considered by capital, because it's about as much profit as they can make and human cost be damned.
Yeah, because like I mentioned that there will still be like considerations of how to do X thing or X thing, but the only thing we worry about is just like how do we get the materials, and do we have enough like human power that is like willing to like do the labor to do it, and how many people can we get to do it in a given area,
and what do we have the means to automate as well?
Oh yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, because also it's like, if we no longer like are getting the bills for this thing or that thing, that's true for like everyone, then also be like, can we get a machine to do this? And if we can, okay, that's great. And now we just have to like check it every once in a while, make sure the machine hasn't broken down. It's not a problem with it. Now spend more time just like reading or stuff like that.
Spending more time reading, more time focusing on potential art, if that's what you're into.
Or spending more time with the family as well.
It's kind of weird though. It's like you say it like, oh, I don't imagine it would be much different. But as soon as you say that, I immediately think, oh, that is a way different world than what we live in.
Well, true, yeah, because we don't have to start.
We will have to maintain one thing only. We still have to oppress the gamers.
We'll have
I will smite them with my sword.
We'll have special camps where all the gamers go. And if you're caught gaming, then you will be put in this re-education camp complex. And you will be
I get caught playing Dragon Age and
you will be taught. You will be taught how to have good music taste, how to be artistic, and how to not be misogynist.
Well, I mean, I agree with the not being misogynist.
I think we could all agree on that.
If the gamers own the means of productions, then Tifa will finally have a double D again.
Also, we can get a lot less Call of Duties.
Yes.
Oh my god! Is there anything like
Call of Duty will be contraband in an anarchist society?
Is there anything we need less in the world than another Call of Duty release this year?
Yes, actually.
Like, we just came out with one last year, and before that.
Well, I don't know if y'all are on the. I've been catching up with the recent news, but Netflix got rid of Friends and The Office.
Thank God.
Outlawing heterosexuality.
I hate both of those shows. I despise both of those shows. They're horrible.
I'm with you on the type, right? I hate both shows. I don't care for either show.
Yeah, I'm not really a fan of either show.
But they did propose on Netflix the first season, so there is that.
And Netflix has the anime
wait.
movie A Silent Voice, which I've reviewed on my channel.
Wait, what is the first season of what?
Pose.
Oh, the show that we were talking about earlier, right?
Yes.
The FX show.
Oh, okay. I forgot.
Yes. At least that part is good for me because I like the show, even though I have a bit of a problem on how I handle certain characters.
True. And the next month will be the third season of She-Ra, Princesses of Power.
I still need to watch that. I haven't had the chance.
Oh,
I
shit,
will. I
still
will
haven't
probably
finished the second
never
season.
see that in my life. But
I still haven't finished the second season, but I actually really enjoyed the first season of that show.
The second season is not as good as the first season, but I still enjoy the second season. I like the anime references. I got that one.
my thing about Friends and The Office is that like both shows can be boiled down to white people being silly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
And that's
that
it.
is what it is.
Plus,
And as JBJ said earlier in the chat, we were discussing about like the anti-woke left. White people are just intellectually, morally, and emotionally inferior is all, with a smiley face emoji or something like that.
I agree.
Yep.
you know, every time I think of Friends, I think of how gentrified New York has become.
Yes.
This isn't to suggest that old New York was all peaches and cream, because it wasn't.
Well, that was the basis of like Escape from New York, the film that was take place in 1992.
Wait, which film?
Escape from New York with Kurt Russell.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I know that movie. Like, I thought that came out in 1982.
It came out in
by the way,
1980,
speaking of
but it
movies,
was made
Miguel,
in like 94 or something like that.
Miguel, you missed when Geek came and showed everybody. That was a bad choice of word. When Geek showed everybody
Jesus.
that they have porn DVDs. Only
Him is
like one of them because they're not because the other ones are apparently YouTube ban worthy. So I would definitely appreciate it.
How do you sell porn DVDs where like it's fucking on the cover? It like literally on the cover it shows you everything.
well because at Sakura Con they just had to put like sticky tape, the like post-its over the nips.
Actually, there is a
Jesus Christ.
there is a market for vintage porn. There's this distribution company called Vinegar Syndrome, which I
may have
heavily.
considered. I may have considered purchasing.
Well, you know,
I'm aware of this market.
well, I have a good chunk of their Blu-rays and DVDs of like vintage porn, because you know I study that stuff. So, okay,
Yeah,
all the more reason.
That's why you have it, I'm sure.
No, I'm serious. Like,
I believe you.
like they release films that practically they clean them up, they provide you extras and commentary, and they release them. They have a lot of older movies from like older directors from back in the 70s and 80s, and they even released some of the loops like on DVD from like when back then when peep shows and those quarter machines and coin slot machines would exist. They release it on DVD or on Blu-ray. And I have a lot of that stuff, and it's really fascinating how things used to be. I mean, not always in the best of reasons, but it existed, and it's a part of that history that hasn't really always been written academically speaking in a very serious way, unfortunately, because the books that do exist on it only tend to specify on certain subgenres and genres of porn. There was one interesting scholar that wrote a couple of years ago a whole mimeograph on pornography and black women. I think her name was Meryl Miller Young, and she practically wrote a really big book. It's a really nice book too from Duke University Press about black women in pornography. So she would talk to like people like Jenny Pepper and those other black women that were in the industry. And interestingly enough, I didn't get to finish it all, but from what I remembered, there has a very interesting and very contradictory history when it comes to black women and pornography, especially when the issues of labor and representation. Because back in, I always like to bring up the big name, the Latina porn actress Vanessa Del Rio, because she's always been a bit of a person that has always been at the forefront of like 70s and 80s porn, and she's often written about academically. And there was a documentary that came about her a couple of years ago with a big book on her from Diane Hansen, and it would write about her on like her own like times in the porn industry. And I always thought it was rather fascinating because one of the things that I tend to notice about Vanessa Del Rio is that she was a very big name back then, but she rarely ever starred in a lot of the movies that she was in. Even though she was she's one of the most recognizable faces of the 70s and 80s pornography, and she's worked with some major actresses in her day, like Seika, some other woman, and a few other women like Samantha Fox, Serena, not Serena Williams, and a whole bunch of other women and men. And yet, when it came to starring, she rarely ever got a starring role, even though she was always a big name, and she was in a ton of these movies. You know, some of it hasn't even gotten a proper Blu-ray release. But this month, I know they're gonna have another movie that's on her with her, not so much starring with her, but she's in it, from Vinegar Syndrome.
Vinegar Syndrome.
Their company that came out a few years ago, they were a streaming service. They were known as Exploitation.tv.
Oh.
They streamed a lot of like exploitation, horror, and adult movies before they became Vinegar Syndrome. And they now release a lot of their stuff on Blu-ray and on DVD. And a lot of their stuff is very high quality in how they release it. They release horror movies, a lot of B movies, a lot of exploitation, grindhouse movies.
Miguel, I have a question for you that's kind of related. Do you know Gail Dines?
Yes, I'm familiar with her work, unfortunately.
Can you tell me your opinion about that? Because I saw like left bookers like being very approving of it.
Decent historian. I'll give her that. When it comes to her history, she knows her stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of analysis on pornography, absolutely some of the worst scholarship I've ever seen in any real sociologist.
Really?
I mean, and believe me, I'm not alone in that. Like, I know plenty of academics that I've spoken to who do not think very highly of her work. Some of her biggest critics being Ronald Weitzer, the anthropologist Laura Maria Augustin has written about her, and so many other scholars of that caliber who are deeply critical of people like her. Mm-hmm. She was. Funny story is, I was actually introduced to Gail Dines on Penn and Teller's Bullshit.
Really?
Yes, because there was an episode about the supposed war on porn, and there were people who were defending it. So they invited like other psychologists and one prominent sex therapist, Marty Klein, and they even had a porn star there, a really popular porn star named Brandy Love.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I've seen the episode you're talking about, actually.
Yes, and she was in it, and so was the radical feminist Diana Russell, who for some reason nobody ever really talks about. Even though if it wasn't for her, anti-porn feminism would have, and anti-sex work feminism wouldn't have even existed the way that it does now, because a lot of that work that was influenced was basically from her. And funny enough, Gail Rubin makes the same complaint in one of her essays called "Blood Under the Bridge," because if anybody knows anything about the whole sex works debacle that happened in the 1980s, it's Gail Rubin. And Gail Rubin is a fantastic scholar, though. You should definitely read her, even though she's a bit controversial when it comes to certain issues, especially the ones on the leather scene and on intergenerational sex, which I'm not going into that.
Right.
I've brought that up a million times. I'm not bringing it up again.
Right. So what are some of like the keynote I guess errors in Gail Dines' scholarship?
She practically reduces pornography as nothing more but exploitative. It's basically an exploitative industry and an exploitative, basically, form of a medium that practically commodifies women's sexuality and practically reduces women to nothing but sex objects, or how she says in Penn and Teller Bullshit. She basically asserts that pornography basically makes women look like whores by nature. and that it comes at a severe cost on how men look
Gotta
at
love
women.
that hatred of sex work. You gotta love that hatred of sex workers.
Look, I'm not. The thing is, this is not a new argument. You've heard this even
Oh
before.
no, definitely not. It's literally like it's an argument that's like a dime a dozen on the internet.
Right.
It really.
I mean, you hear from all over that kind of crowd. Although I would argue, though, that when it comes to the positions of anti-porn and anti-sex work, there have always been different positions and how they were going about it. There's an interesting book that was written by I think her name was Carolyn Bronstein, who wrote a really nuanced book on the history of the anti-pornography movement. I would argue she probably wrote the best book because a lot of other books tend to make a really bad habit of generalizing their positions. But if you look at the anti-modern pornography movement, a lot of them tend to hold this very similar views. Very few of them tend to deviate from what they actually think. Because even within radical feminism back in the day, when it comes to the issues of anti-pornography feminism, a lot of them held different views, even on the issues of rape, and the issues of incest, and so on and so forth. Contrary to what most people believe.
Yeah.
I remember when I was reading Susan Brown Miller's Against Her Will, followed by with Catherine McKinnon's Towards the Feminist Theory of the State. And while both of them tend to hold very similar views on the issues of rape, Catherine McKinnon would deviate very heavily in terms of how a lot of feminists today tend to look at the issues of rape. Because while a lot of people within feminist circle tend to look at the issue of rape as strictly an issue of power and domination, Catherine McKinnon also likes to include the argument that this is more than just that. You also have to include the sexual elements of rape. You can't just look at it from just strictly a position of power because this ignores the power relations between heterosexual men and women. It's a whole different thing that could be spoken about for hours because that contention still exists in certain radical feminist circles. I'm reading recently. I've been reading an interesting book about this topic from Anne Cahill called "Rethinking Rape," where she tries to create a theory on this matter using both the liberal and the radical feminist argument. And she both tackles what they both get right and what they both get wrong. And from what I remembered, because I didn't finish the book yet, is that where she looks at the issues, how Susan Brown Miller makes the issue look, she tends to look at Susan Brown Miller in the position that she calls a liberal feminist position, which to me is kind of strange considering that Brown Miller has always named herself as a radical feminist, and that's where she practically came from. But I guess I could see why she considers it a liberal position, because that's how a lot of liberal feminists and even other feminists tend to look at the issue in terms of the issues of rape, where she practically looks at it that she practically ignores the sexual elements of these issues, despite the fact that Susan Brown Miller has even brought up a lot of issues when it comes to the issues of sexuality. Whereas I'm trying to keep this really brief. It's not the most nuanced take on the matter, but I'm just trying to keep it brief. Whereas with Catherine McKinnon and her arguments, the problem with Catherine McKinnon is that she doesn't really ever consider the issue of women's agency. She practically keeps them in a subordinate position because to her, no such thing can possibly exist in a society like ours. It cannot and will not exist in her eyes.
Right.
Which is true because when I was reading Towards the Feminist Theory of the State, she's basically looked at every form of issue, whether it be in law and in practice and in issues of consent. She practically, she doesn't go around her way, contrary to what anti-feminists like to believe, that all heterosexual sex is rape. She never says that. What she does see is that there is still inherently an unequal balance in heterosexual sex. And that's always been her biggest argument. And she looks at it from a much more macro scale. And that also means questioning some ideas that people within the sex positive community tend to not like, because one of the biggest things that her and Andrew Durkheim have always argued against was the concepts of consent, which in a lot of circles that would get you in a lot of trouble for even questioning the concepts of consent.
Mm.
You know, I know, because I've been through it. I've gotten in a lot of trouble from merely suggesting that consent, while necessary, is not really the full. It's not the legal or practical mode of ethics when it comes to the issues of sexuality in an everyday life.
I mean, yeah, I only be like, at least my view on consent is that consent is like the baseline for it to not be rape, but it's not like the baseline. Like, it doesn't make it ethical necessarily.
Absolutely, and that's the part where I will agree with the radical feminists on. Just because something can be seen as inherently okay or legal, or let alone you provide a permission to it, doesn't necessarily make it ethical. And I do think the radical feminists make a good argument on that. And also, I would like to include the legal scholar Joseph Feischl, who's written a really interesting book on the uses of consent. And this is the thing that some of us have tried to argue for a very long time, but in certain circles, that's just not seen as something that's acceptable to do. Because I've always argued that, well, concepts of consent have a usage both legally and ethically. I don't think it's the only way we should be looking at issues in general, because just because something can be legally consensual does not necessarily negate the real problems that come with it, because there are things that could be illegal and are not really harmful to begin with, while there are things that are perfectly legal and can be quite harmful to you.
That's kind of my issue with like, it seems to me that a lot of people want to argue that certain sexual practices are inherently okay because they're consensual, when it kind of, I mean, it can be consensual, but it can also be damaging or negative in other ways. So you don't, like, it doesn't have to be sexual assault to be questionable.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people seem to think the opposite. So, a lot of people seem to think that, like, I don't know, like very, like, I've had arguments with people. I don't know if I want to go into detail because it's a bit heavy, but I've had arguments with people where they essentially try to justify things that have very obvious questionable aspects with, well, it's consensual, it's not sexual assault, therefore it's okay. And I don't buy that argument at all.
Of course. I mean, because see, that's the thing that I think we can all agree on. Although in certain circles, and I would argue, in for example, Left Book, it could definitely get you into a lot of trouble, especially a couple of years ago when Left Book was obsessed with this whole debacle. That I think the biggest problem with how people look at the issues of consent is that they want consent to be doing things that consent as a theory cannot possibly do.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, just because you consent to something doesn't necessarily make it good, and just because you can't consent to something doesn't necessarily mean that it's inherently a bad thing either. Because again, there are things that for example, in law is seen as something potentially harmful and it is illegal, but yet it's really not. For example, if we're to talk about things like cannabis, well, I don't want to make the argument that cannabis is inherently healthy, because that argument is nonsensical. It certainly can be harmful. It's just not as harmful as most people like to believe that it is.
But my weed cured my cancer.
Yeah, see, when you hear arguments like that, no one's going to take us seriously. Because, I mean, obviously, if you have heart problems or you have serious forms of mental illness, you should not be smoking cannabis to begin with.
Oh yeah, the thing is that smoking cannabis can exacerbate symptoms of psychosis and people who were prone to develop schizophrenia can also develop it at an earlier age if they smoke cannabis.
Of course.
So it's not like something that comes with zero risk,
Right.
but it's not worse, and I'd argue it's I'd argue that it's actually healthier. The key word being the meaning it's in comparison to something else than cigarettes.
Absolutely. See, that's the argument I'm trying to make here about the whole issues of illegality and consent. Is that something like that, which is clearly a lot less crappy for your health in comparison to something like cigarettes, it's pretty telling because cigarettes is legal if you're over 18, or in certain states 19, or in some other states 21.
21 in Massachusetts.
Now, yeah, it's 21 in New York now as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So,
although cannabis is legal in both states now, which is
decriminalized. Decriminalization, legalization are two different things.
Well, I mean, they actually have like shops up here, so in Massachusetts at least it's legalized. But in New York,
state law,
it's decriminalized. Oh, I just mean by state law.
Yes, by state law you'd be correct. On the federal law, you would not be correct.
Oh, on federal law, I would not be correct. On federal law, it's not even really decriminalized. Like, quite literally, federal officers could come in and just raid a pot shop if they wanted to.
Yeah, that was the concern with in Washington State when the state first passed the law. But when it became like more than a year, I guess they're just gonna leave it alone. But because of those federal laws, it means that like the cannabis businesses have to like do strictly cash only for all transactions, including paying their employees.
Yes. Yeah, and D&D. Goddamn DEA, the DEA, quite famously, I think I was still in high school when it happened, and I kind of like was like, yeah, no, this is fucked up. They raided a reservation because cannabis was legal on the reservation or on that reservation, and they raided that reservation and like took all their pot, and it's like yeah, we say that these places have sovereignty, yet clearly the American government does not respect that sovereignty, and the fact that gets done does mean that feasibly it could be done in a place like Massachusetts, where if someone opens up a shop in Massachusetts, which they actually opened one up in the city that I live in. And like you said, it's the same thing here, where it's like all cash. You can't like use a credit card to buy it.
Yep.
I can't put all my weed on my credit card. Not yet. Not yet. Need dystopian capitalism for that.
But yeah, I want to go back to the consent debacle.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all right. So yes, see that's the argument that I've been trying to make, is that just because something is seen as inherently legal, it doesn't always imply that it's bad. Pot, for example, could be seen as way less bad in comparison to something that is legal, like cigarettes, which has no real health benefits, and the ones that do exist are very, very minimal. Which you might as well just not even see it as something as a big deal.
Wait, there are supposed health benefits to smoking cigarettes?
I mean, people do it. If I remember, I don't want to come off like I have any real evidence on this, because I don't have anything available to me to demonstrate that. But a lot of people tend to use cigarettes as a way to cope with stress. And if I remember correctly, there was one study that implied that it might have also helped with like stopping certain cells and certain things in HIV, which is really wild.
Like, those are some pretty obscure health benefits, though. Like,
exactly. That's why I don't even bother bringing it up, because I'm like, these are kind of, well, it's not so much the stress one, because most people do smoke to relieve stress, but I don't know if that's so much a good health benefit to begin with. It really isn't.
Oh no, especially not if what it's doing is it's also causing an addiction, because that in itself, like the fact that you're addicted will start to become a stress, in that literally if you don't smoke a cigarette, you'll just be stressed by the fact that your body's nagging you to do so.
Yeah.
Right. And see, that's the thing. That's why I've always argued. Like, I think one has to be careful in how we look at the issues of consent as a legal and as an ethical praxis, because you have to understand those concepts are not exactly alone in existing in terms of justification of how they're often applied in said society. You know, but because again, there's a lot of, and I think I just best summarize it like this: there are things that are perfectly legal in the eyes of the law, and yet there are some of the most damaging things that can be done to you. Football, for example, is a perfect example of that.
Oh yeah, and
Where,
you're basically guaranteed to come out of it, come out the other end with CTE. I think the actual statistic was something that like 96% of former NFL players developed CTE,
CTE.
chronic traumatic encephaly.
Oh, okay.
It's caused by or one of the main causes, because it's also common in like combat sports as well,
Yes.
is that it's caused by repeated subconcussive blows to the brain. So it has less to do with getting a lot of concussions, and more that you take a lot of blows that aren't quite enough to give you a concussion, but you take them over such a long period of time. It's like if you have a steel girder and you repeatedly put a stress on it that it can handle, but that it actually does stress like the metal itself, eventually it will fail. And it's the same thing with your brain, where if you repeatedly take blows that don't quite concuss you, but you take them all the time on a like near regular basis, you're eventually, the brain damage will have an accumulative effect, and
Right.
it shows visibly on like the brains of like, actually, so an even worse offender than the NFL, like where this is like really big, so the biggest offender is actually the WWE, especially during the Attitude Era.
A lot of
Whereas
botched hits.
well, I mean, even if you didn't have the botches, just what they chose to do automatically required taking a lot of blows to the head. As entertaining as it was to see a guy get hit in the head with a, well, the chairs are actually made out of aluminum, but you know, it's still a metal chair. It's still a metal folding chair to the head. As amusing it as it was to watch a guy get cracked over the head, pretty much at least once every week there was some guy that did it. That built up over time, and the fact that they have a constant year-long schedule because they're about entertainment, as opposed to the more sports aspect. Like, it's a sport in the fact that it requires athleticism, it requires training, and it's more like a cooperative sport as opposed to a competitive sport like WWE.
I think
But
we could all.
because it's about entertainment and ratings, it's like every week. Yeah, that was happening every week, and there are a lot more like most of the people dying. Like Chris Benoit actually had really bad CTE.
Yeah.
Like they said his brain resembled that of like an 80-year-old dementia patient. And
And he
he was
killed his whole family.
Yep.
And he was less than 40 when he killed himself. And I actually think that CTE probably was a big contributing factor to
It
that.
absolutely is.
His years of steroid abuse, where with football, like American football is just a rough fucking sport. Like I've played it. I was on the football team in high school. It is a rough fucking sport. You're constantly taking blows to the head, and your head hurts pretty much at the end of every game if you're a player.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not from like direct blows from to the head. It's from like when you're tackled. Even if your head doesn't hit the ground, your head will often like get jostled from the impact.
Yep.
And it is, yeah, it's seen as completely legal, but that doesn't, and as something that someone can consent to, but it's actually a really, like, it is absolutely, like, damaging to your brain. It doesn't mean that it's not damaging just because you can legally do it. Where it's illegal to smoke pot, and you can't consent to it by law, but legal, yeah, it's just, smoking pot isn't going to cause CTE. In my case, it actually, it actually helps me in the fact that it'll reduce stress caused by my anxiety.
Right.
But, I also know that there's risks for, like, let's say I was on something like, if I was on LSD and I was having an episode of psychosis, which can sometimes be induced by bad trips on, like, LSD,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't think, oh, I need to smoke some pot. Because even as someone who smokes pot as much as I do, I also do, like obviously, like, whenever I first smoke it, there's, like, an initial bout of paranoia that I go through for, like, 20 minutes. And what I try and do is I try and sit and stay calm for, like, that 20 minutes. And once that 20 minutes passes by, it's, a much smoother ride.
I think that's what I did when the first time I ever got like high off of weed, because I was also drinking that night, but I was at a party with friends, so it was just like, oh my god, oh, but no wonder people do this. My god, it's like I'm seeing colors or something like that. I didn't see colors, but it's just like it was like something, and it's like
no, although weed is a mild psychedelic.
Yeah, what was is like a friend was got like 2 Swisher Sweets and like Frankenstein like them to like take out half of like the tobacco and then put in some like a weed, and so I took a big hit off of it, but I didn't finish it. The guy who made the blunt basically like finished the rest of it, and so yeah.
Sweets, I forgot that you were West Coast.
That's what we call them. I sold them at the gas station I worked at.
Hey, that's what Tupac would smoke his blunts out of. So,
yeah, it was a split.
On the East Coast, we have Gaines and Dutch Masters.
Okay, yeah, we don't have those products over here.
How in the world did we get from to the issue of Gail Dines to consent to pot?
It was
these
you,
conversations tend to be rambly.
Yes.
Miguel, you got to realize I'm also a big pothead, so like if weed is even mentioned, it'll take up some chunk of time in a stream of mine, and that's just like contractually obligated. But yeah, we can backpedal a little bit if you'd like.
Okay. To answer to the rambling, I only do that here because otherwise, when I'm in conferences or I'm talking to people in general, I tend to stick to the topic. It's just that in this place, we tend to be, we tend to have full anarchy.
Well, also, is that not the beauty of this channel? I mean.
Rose, I recall you doing that even with ContraPoints. I didn't forget the interview you had with ContraPoints.
Oh, that was. I feel like that one was like a bit awkward.
To be fair, Natalie seems like an awkward type in person in general.
Natalie's definitely a quieter person, and I probably didn't help by like being full like anarchist at that moment. But yeah,
I mean, Natalie is not Sandra Bernhard if we're talking loud and larger than life. If we're talking.
I don't know who Sandra Bernhard is.
She's a bisexual actress. I
Okay.
remember she was the nurse in Pose, so I remember her from there.
damn bisexuals, always thinking about yourselves. You greedy bisexuals.
Hey, it's not our fault that we're the reason.
It's not our fault that literally everybody's hot.
We gave you guys Freddie Mercury. We gave you Oscar Wilde. Even though I had some asshole tell me that Freddie Mercury wasn't bi, I'm like, have you lost your goddamn mind?
Oh my god, Freddie Mercury was fucking bi. He was married to a woman, and himself had mentioned that he loved his wife, and it's documented that he also was attracted to men.
Exactly. But yet, for some reason,
just factually true that Freddie Mercury was bisexual.
Right, but some people still live in denial of it.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Freddie Mercury was just a fag, is what I hear. That's what I always hear from straight people. It's like, one, no, like you can't use that word. That's our word. And second, no, you're wrong. Freddie Mercury had a wife, and himself said that he still very much loved her. I mean, hell, the song Fat Bottom Girls, you cannot write that song and not be attracted to women.
It's like...
I want to break free.
It reminds me of like the whole Whitney Houston debacle. When I tell people, I'm like, okay, I don't know if you guys know, but I'm pretty sure Whitney Houston was into women at some point in her life.
Actually, that did came up in the Whitney Houston documentary I saw last year in 2018. Whitney, and that one was like got the approval of the Whitney Houston's family, as opposed to like the previous Whitney Houston documentary.
Yes, you're correct.
I don't think a lot of people understand how far bisexual erasure goes.
I will bring up that point in a moment, but I wanted to bring up the Whitney Houston documentary. You are correct until her mother, Sissy, found out about the whole molestation issue. In fact, when that came out to the public, because it was included in the documentary, if you remember, she practically denounced it because she was like, I don't know, no one told me anything, and then she got mad at the fact that it even got brought up in the first place. Never mind the fact that her mother is a horrible human being.
Yeah.
Like Sissy, is literally a horrible human being. Like she's also a massive homophobe. Like some people don't really like to bring that up because Sissy was often seen as the big name of of her time because she was a singer at her days that was often seen as the forefront of pushing Black women forward. But the problem is that Sissy was also not exactly the greatest person either.
Yeah,
she was really bad. Like you often hear a lot of like families who tend to be entertainers tend to be really bad towards the children in general. The Jackson family is very famous for that.
Oh, I was just about to say, like, the Jackson family was very much abusive towards their kids.
Yeah. And
Jackson 5 were just flat out abused growing up.
Yeah. And then there's, Marvin Gaye, who also practically got murdered by his own father.
Yeah, I was going to say, wasn't Marvin Gaye murdered by his own father?
Yes. I mean, by no means is it exclusive to these folks, but they're the most prolific examples.
Yeah.
And the thing is
about Whitney happens to resonate in our popular culture a lot more than a lot of other.
Wait, what were you saying?
They tend to also be a lot more. They also tend to be artists that are like a lot more noted in the music industry as well. So.
Oh, absolutely. Especially Michael Jackson. You can't talk about 20th century pop music without Michael Jackson.
Yep.
For better or for worse, you can't.
I'm not even a fan yet. Or I'm not even like a fan of Michael Jackson yet. I can't I can't like bring up like, I can't even imagine a conversation about like 20th century music that doesn't involve Michael Jackson.
Right. Well,
Mhm.
I can't say that I'm not a fan. I'm a big fan of his music, although I can't pretend like his transgressions weren't a big problem, because they were.
Yeah.
But
Cough, cough, the Neverland Ranch.
like,
Mhm.
even if it turns out, look, I have to bring this up. Even if those boys supposedly lie, I don't think they're lying. Just to make it clear,
I really don't.
Yeah.
I
because
don't
I
think
can't
people
pretend like
lie
Michael
about that
Jackson
shit.
didn't have his transgressions.
Mhm.
You know, especially because there was one person in the early 2000s that practically tried to make a case that Michael Jackson might have been a pedophile. But that's a whole different argument for another day. Um, but I'm a big fan of his music, but I can't pretend like Michael Jackson wasn't a very problematic person in his own life.
Yeah.
Because Michael Jackson's life was literally a mess.
Mhm.
Why? I don't know. I don't know why would that be necessarily a surprise to anybody if he did what he did.
Mhm.
You know, like I think the problem is that we live in a celebrity culture where we don't really like to admit that celebrities are people. We tend to look at
Yes.
them as idols.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a big right now. Actually, honestly, I think that's a big
I
problem
mean, I
with
can't.
like the problem
I
with
also
like people who are like fans of like a certain like YouTubers as well. We just have this cult of personality of not only celebrities but a lot of people. We just tend to put them on pedestals, and so when we hear criticisms about them or like facts about them that don't shine them in the good light, there'll be people that will just be standards for those kind of people, and that
they'll
can
just
be a problem.
they'll just jump in and like defend them, which is something that like I've never really been one to do. Like you
Mhm.
brought up like you're a fan, or Miguel, you brought up that you're a fan of Michael Jackson, but like also that Michael Jackson was very much problematic. I mean, I
Mhm.
can't criticize you for the fact that you like someone problematic because while
Mhm.
I can't think of any pedophiles whose music I listen to. At least specifically like people who were caught sexually abusing children that I'm like a fan of.
Right.
But I literally listen to Falling in Reverse, and like Ronnie Radke's like one of the biggest pieces of shit I can think of in like modern music. Like more in like he's just kind of like a douchebag who like, but yeah, he's someone who's like, but also if anybody criticizes him, like Falling in Reverse fans will be like, oh, you just don't understand Ronnie Radke. It's like, no, I've been listening to his music since fucking 2013. Since and I'm like a fan of his music, but I still think he's a piece of shit.
Mhm.
Like I'm not gonna mince words.
Which is why I have to like repeat what Marty Abernathy, my friend, would always say: the only good hero is a sandwich. I mean, I
Well, it'll
love,
always save the day when you're starving.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I love music by Tool, but when I found out what Maynard James Keenan was doing, it's been really hard for me to listen to like any Tool stuff. I'm definitely not going to give them any money. I'm going to like find covers by other artists that like do like Brass Against has like done some good covers of a couple
But
of their songs.
interesting you brought that up, because I think somebody in Tool was having a new project, and usually people like to bring up the scandals that other artists these artists tend to go through, but nobody, for some reason, I think everybody just suddenly forgot this allegation about Maynard.
I will never forget. I'll
But I
definitely.
didn't forget. I mean, I don't really listen to Tool like that, so I'm
Mhm.
not really losing a battle on that matter. Like,
Yeah, I mean, for me, I never really listened much to Tool, so I'm like, oh, all right, I'll keep that in mind. That Maynard is like I can't remember exactly what the
He's
allegation.
definitely a rapist. He definitely like raped one of them, and he would like attempt to do other things to other women, while some women would just like, oh no, I'm out of here, and try to rock out the door.
Yeah, I heard that like he was a creep. That was really all I
Yes.
heard from it. I didn't hear like the actual allegations, but I'm like, all right, I'll keep that in mind. That Maynard James Keaton is like, wait, that's his name, right?
Yes, Maynard James Keenan. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll keep in mind that like he's not like a good person, but I'm also like I'm also not really gonna be looking up Tool songs to listen to.
Yep.
I mean, I don't listen to Tool. Like, I have their debut. That's as much as
No,
I'll probably
you
ever
only
listen to them.
You only listen to Korn.
I mean, I still listen to Korn. I wouldn't be able to listen to metal in general if it hadn't been for them, Judas Priest, Cradle of Filth, and Nightwish, because those are the early bands that I was listening to growing up in middle school to get introduced into metal. So, as much as I still love Korn, I can't pretend like the members of Korn are a bunch of jackasses. Like Jonathan
Yeah.
Davis is a big Ron
Oh
Paul
my
fan.
god! Oh my god! I kind of want to like just to take Jonathan Davis's head and just like put it on the curb and give it a little stompy stomp.
And to make it better,
just a gentle stomp. Enough to
make
break teeth, but not to fracture the skull.
And to make matters better, Brian Welch was performing some of the Korn's music with Mike Huckabee, and he was playing the bass.
Yeah.
Well.
Oh,
Well, yeah, I know that. I was going to say I know that both that it was like Brian Welsh and Jonathan Davis, who like those are like the specific ones that I could name who were like very douchey right wingers.
I mean, I
Like,
know of like Ted
Jonathan
Nugent, but no one's
Davis
surprised at Ted Nugent.
Okay, but I mean, Ted Nugent is like literally just like 70s pop rock who's still living off of Cat Scratch Fever.
Yep.
Who? Wait, who are you talking about?
Ted Nugent.
Ted Nugent.
Oh, this reminds me of a YouTube comment because Mike Huckabee also performed with Ted Nugent.
Yes.
And then somebody was like, "Oh, he goes around dissing people like Beyonce, but he's perfectly okay with playing with pedophile musicians like Ted Nugent." I'm sorry, but that made me laugh because I'm like, "Oh shit, he went there." Which reminds me of all like the Roy Moores and all those other jackasses.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny for all the talk that guys like Ted Nugent have about like hating pedophiles. He's also admitted to taking advantage of underage groupies. The fact that taking advantage of them in the fact that they were underage. By the way, I don't mean like he gave them Quaaludes or anything. So I don't need any of that pedantic bullshit because it's already an abuse. Just the fact that they were 15. Like
actually, they were even younger than that.
I was going to say that they were at least as young as 15, if not younger.
Because I remember the VH1 documentary that was released on him. This was way long ago. Where they were talking about it. They were talking about it in a really like blank face kind of way, like, oh yeah, the groupies, he liked to hang around with girls. That was his real addiction because he wasn't into drugs or alcohol like so many rock stars of his day. He was into groupies, young teenage groupies, and he's like, and the way he was describing it, he's like, oh, you had to be there, da da da, and I'm like, okay, this is nothing new to hear rock stars or even other musicians have their way, wanting their way with teenagers. It's nothing new. You even look at this in the history of rock music. I could practically write a whole book about it because that's how much it's happened.
I mean, Steven Tyler literally adopted his 14-year-old girlfriend so he could take her over state lines.
Right,
it's nothing new. Jimmy Page was also noted. So many like.
Where he didn't marry somebody, he kidnapped Lori Maddox.
Yeah.
And had his way with her. And funny enough, so did David Bowie, but the way she described David Bowie was a bit more, and this is me putting it really loosely, nuanced. Because she wrote an article about it with David Bowie, and obviously when the day he died is when I believe it came out, and everybody was in shock. well, I wasn't really in shock, to be honest with you, because, like I said, I've been a big rock fan for a very long time.
Yeah, it's like the set. It was literally like the rock star thing to do in the '70s, and it was like a very toxic thing.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
I don't. This is the thing that I think people really genuinely do not understand, because we weren't born at that time. We didn't live at a time. But the way that people, especially if you look at the psychiatric literature, people did not talk about child sexual abuse the way that we talk about it today. It certainly wasn't true of the '80s, because if you look at a lot of books on sex, especially at the time like the '70s, where things like gay live, women live, and child liberation movements were becoming the thing. I don't think people genuinely understand the sexual politics of that day. How ridiculously different things were for those days. It doesn't make it less right, but I don't. But I think it's important to contextualize that these matters were not really brought up in the mainstream. They were, by and large, mostly brought up in the underground feminist movements of the 1970s. It was until the late 1970s where things began to really turn things around, especially in the feminist movement, because I don't think many people tend to realize that if it wasn't for the radical feminists of those days, along with the cabal of scholars that tried to talk about it, this issue probably would have never hit the mainstream the way it did. You know, that's the part I think people don't really understand, that said issues were not really mainstream, and if they and whenever these issues were brought, and there were laws against them, it was often either seen as a class issue or a sexual orientation issue. It was rarely ever seen as a problem that expanded regardless of class lines, regardless
Well, yeah,
of
because
racial
it was only
lines.
ever. Yeah, because they basically were. It was only ever like poor people and gay people who got in trouble for it, and never really straight people, or rich or straight people, or rich straight people.
In fact, there's an interesting book that came out a couple of years ago from a historian who practically wrote a really interesting but also kind of disturbing book on the history of American men marrying minors. I don't remember the name of the book. It's on my wish list because I still need to read the book. But I remember there was a book like that where it was written about how back then, I mean, it still happens today, especially among certain religions, especially here in the United States, where grown men would marry minors. You know, and it has there's a real history that existed behind this in American history. It's just that in today's world, again, we see that as rightfully unacceptable, but we don't really talk about how it still exists even within our country, because it's not uncommon to hear Mormons or other kinds of fringe areas of certain religions still practicing these things. We like to talk about these things when it comes to the Middle East or African nations, but we rarely ever talk about it when it comes to the Western nations, because
Oh
we
yeah,
like to believe that we're
never
beyond it,
quite
but
the thing.
that's not entirely true.
Yeah, I was going to say white people never like to address their own problems when they can leverage that problem against a brown or black person. Just
It's a racialized issue. There
it
is a
really,
racialized context here. There's no doubt. And I mean, regardless of race or class, it's wrong is wrong in this matter.
it's still wrong, obviously. Like that, it's like I am quite literally a moral relativist, and I will like agree that in all cases, it is wrong for an adult to marry and have sexual contact with, or not like a with a like child or someone who is definitely not an adult.
Absolutely. But see, but okay, back to the whole '70s thing. I think that's the thing that I think people tend to fail to understand whenever these topics come about. Because to us today, we look at it and we look like, what the hell were people thinking back then? You know? But it becomes abundantly clear when you start looking at the history. You tend to realize that, okay, now this makes perfect sense why people, were thinking the way they did, because these kinds of issues were often isolated to several groups of people. You know, And like I said, it was until the late 1970s is when things started really changing around. There was an interesting book that came about this. It got like a bunch of rave reviews, but it also got a bit of heckle from certain scholars. It was, I think the title was called "The Politics of Child Sexual Abuse" by the sociologist Nancy Whittier. I mean, these past couple of years in academic literature, we've actually gotten a lot of interesting literature on these matters.
Mm-hmm.
And I call dibs because I practically read all that stuff for my work.
Well, yeah, I mean, aren't you a sexologist, or at least that was
Yes, yes. I mean,
your
I do
study?
study sexology. I study a wide variety of people, not just that one specific group that I shall not name because I don't want this conversation to go there. But I study more than just them. I
Understandably.
study other areas too.
Oh
Like,
yeah, I've talked to you about like the other like in private. In private, I've talked to the one that you don't want to mention, and I know which one.
yes,
But yeah,
but they're not the only group I study.
yeah. But I also know like I've talked to you about like your other work as well.
Right. Like, that's not my whole book library. Trust me. But if that was the case, I would be questioning my sanity right now.
Oh yeah, I'd be questioning your sanity if that was all you studied as well. Like,
Right. I mean, it's definitely something I do study and I do take extremely seriously, but it's definitely not the only thing I study. Like, I study other
oh, it's
things.
definitely. Oh yeah, it's definitely something that like should be studied just because we need to understand it. But like, if that's the only thing you study, you do have to question someone a bit. It's like, why is this your only area of study?
Right, right. I'm just like going to myself, like, I'm like, okay, this is definitely something I'm very invested in, but it's clearly not the only thing that I'm interested in. Like, I'm not going to go away from it because I did have to take a bit of a hiatus on it because I didn't want to land myself into insanity. So that's why I was studying other things for a while as well.
I think that's just a natural thing to do. Is it's like it's good to have like that balance of like being able to like study multiple different things because you can't have the problem of being like the a expert in just one thing. Like Garrett would always bring this up on his old channel that there was like in either a book or a documentary. I think it was a book of like the expert of everything. They found like this one professor in this one university in the biology department that is the world's most foremost expert on this one type of mollusk. He can tell you everything about that one mollusk, but having a normal conversation with other human beings, that's not something he can do. And it's just like, so it's good to diversify. And also like to keep your mind young, as it were. It's like if you're constantly learning, then you're avoid those kinds of problems like later on in life. And I think it's like a much more interesting person if they have like multiple different like interests. That's also kind of like for my channel. The reason why I have done like the reason why I have done anarchist contacts because I am baby anarchist and I like to like at least be well knowledge about like a subject if I decide to like make a topic of a video or something like that. Don't mind doing like hangouts like this because they're more casual, more free form, and like I just like can give my opinions about things. But for my channel, I like also don't want to be just about anarchism because I like to have fun. So that's why I play video games. That's why I review movies and like anime. And well, with anime, I feel. Yeah, I feel much more of like an expert on anime, so I'd be willing to talk about that. I'm sorry, I talked over you, Christian.
Oh, I've actually got to start streaming on my or streaming video games on my channel because I actually do have the means to do it now that I have a PS4. I just haven't gotten around to it because I kind of don't want to show everybody how bad I actually am at Dark Souls and Bloodborne.
I probably could do that. I do have Dark Souls, but not the remaster version on Steam. So it's like, yeah. No, by the way, hi, Deadman Animation.
Oh, we have Deadman Animation in the chat.
Yep, he showed up 15 minutes ago on his lunch break at work.
Also, I want to respond to Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree with you. One of the biggest problems with academia is that academia has a notorious habit of making you specialize into things. Like that's the only thing you ever tend to ever do anything about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I just realized I'm like, okay, I want to be an academic. I want to do real academic work, but I don't want to limit myself into writing just one thing, especially when it comes to issues of human sexuality, because I do write about other things. I write about sexual autonomy. I write about consent. Although I do deviate quite heavily on how a lot of leftists think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I write about cruising. I write
How dare you
about
not toe the party line?
well then hey, count me out because I like to think about other things that are not even my own positions. I tend to be, you know, to me, as someone that likes to engage with things, I'm always a big
Although, of
believer
course,
of
always exclude the little Nazis, right?
if you're not
Like,
engaging,
that group of people's not even worth talking to.
well, if you're not engaging with what you're reading, do you really understand what you're reading? You know,
No.
are you interested in reading the literature because you want to be proven right, or do you read the literature because you want to be critical of things, or are you even let alone critical of said text? You know, I'm always reminded of that really fascinating interview that the Real News did with the political scientist Norman Finkelstein on the Israel-Palestine conflict when he was talking about his own life because he used to be a former Maoist
Mm.
and he was a really big follower of like people like Paul Sweezy and all those guys, you know, and he would talk about how he would read books just so he could prove his professors wrong about Maoism and Marxism. You know, because he was a big, he was a very ardent supporter of Chairman Mao, and he would go out of his way to read all these books of statistical work from these like really fringe economists, just so they can call the professor's bluff. But until once Chairman Mao died and the gang of, I think it was the gang of 5, 7, I don't remember, came about and everything fell apart, he couldn't believe it. It completely destroyed his worldview. And so I took that to heart when he said that about himself, because I'm like, crap, I should not be reading these things to prove people wrong or prove myself right. I should be critical of these texts, as long with
But
also
I'm
realizing
critical of
when
any.
they're correct.
Yeah. I mean, I also try to be critical of things that I read, even if I know I'm going to generally agree with a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll even read, like, I'm more than willing to read stuff that I don't think will verify my viewpoint in the hopes that it'll present something I might not have thought about before. And
Absolutely.
even if it doesn't turn into, oh, I agree with this point in the book, or this point in this, I'll read it and I'll look at that point and maybe I'll think about that point and that point will change my view.
Right. See,
And
see,
I think that's the way you're supposed to approach education. Is you're supposed to be willing to accept that you might be wrong or that you don't have the thing is that nobody's going to have this this ultimate godly perspective that they just see everything and they don't need to question any of their views because they've considered everything.
Mm-hmm.
right. Because the thing is, one of the things I think many of us would like to believe is that no one likes to admit that they could be wrong. You know, you could be the most prominent scholar of said topic, and you're still capable of being wrong.
Yep.
Darwin was right about a lot of things when it came to natural selection, but when later science came about, it was obvious that he also made mistakes. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make natural selection any less wrong. It's just that it
Or
clearly
that's
it's
right.
improved.
You mean any less right?
Right. Sorry. See,
I think it was a bit of like a slip that just happened because of the subject that we're talking about. But I thought it was funny. You're like, that doesn't make natural selection any less wrong. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Are you going to try and tell me that I was birthed from some sky patriarch? Because
no, I promise
I
you,
want
I
to
am
read
not.
an old
I am not Ken
story
Ham.
I will say probably after this topic, I'd like to wrap up the
Yep.
stream, just because I have to work tomorrow morning at like 5 and at 5 in the morning, and it's like 8:30 here. So
Yep,
Yeah.
we've been going about like 3 hours, but it's been a good conversation.
Indeed. I feel I haven't heard from any of y'all in forever, except for Piper, and that's a once in a very blue moon.
to be fair, I have a very hard time trying to get in contact with you. You seem pretty busy most of the time. I mean, I am too, so that's probably part of what makes it hard. But yeah,
maybe, but I mean, if if you like give me a Facebook chat, I'll eventually will talk to you. I'm less busy than what I used to be because now my job, I'm more stable with it. So I am willing to talk. It's just the problem is the vast majority of the time when I am talking on Facebook, it's either with other people or I'm stuck in Facebook groups debating everybody why they're full of shit.
uh,
And
oh
of
god,
course,
Leftfoot is a fucking mess.
I got involved in the whole pride conversation about kink. And of course, I had to defend kink, and everybody was looking at me like I was a degenerate.
Well, I
And I'm
mean,
just,
you are a degenerate, but that's not a bad thing.
I mean, of course I am. I know what I am. But the thing is, I look at the condemnations and and all the arguments that I hear from some of these people, especially when they bring up the child argument. I'm just here going like, wow, these people don't really understand what pride really was about. Nor do they understand that adopting the same nonsensical rhetoric that people have used against us to justify their condemnations against kink is so wild to me. It's so
Well, remember,
internalizing.
you're not allowed to be nude around children because it'll scar them for life. Because
But yet,
humans
violence.
are, humans are born with a suit and tie on, and if they're a girl, they're born with a dress, and you can't change that.
Like,
Your clothes are unchangeable.
the thing is, the thing that always bothered me is that a lot of adults have this weird projection when it
Yeah.
comes to children. A lot of adults want to see themselves as the heroes that
Oh yeah,
nobody ever
don't
asked
swear
for.
around my children is like one of my favorite things.
Right.
It's like my mother did try to sell it or try to like say that my mother just stopped giving up on it. My mother's like, I swear too much around the fucking kids. If you're around them and you drop an F bomb, it's nothing they haven't heard before.
Right. They probably heard it in school.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that with a lot of adults, they think that the children they're going to grow up to be Disney characters. That they're all ignorant and that they're very naive of things.
Oh shucks.
I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is 2019. We live in a world where people are growing up very quickly when it comes to understanding the bitter realities of the world. You know, you can't. There's no such thing as a time of innocence for children. It sure as hell. If you're a child of color, you know damn well that does not exist in your life.
Oh yeah. Also, I mean, the idea too that somehow like not having a kink makes you innocent and not just like boring. I'd be.
Like, I mean, look, and this reminds me of an interview that the
I get.
lovely
I
people.
mean, I don't really want to shit talk people who don't have kinks. I'm making a joke, by the way.
I mean,
I
obviously,
feel like I have to clarify that.
I mean, having a kink or not having a kink, I'm gonna take the words that Yasmin Nair said in an interview with, I believe it was the Campaign Sharks. Is just fuck people. There's no need for these identities, and there's no need to think that you're better than other people. Who cares? You know, I always thought that was because this was in regards to like the whole that article that came out a while ago about how like polyamory is this really revolutionary thing, and then Gasman Nair came with an article calling it polyamory is just gay marriage for straight people. And we were just laughing. I was just laughing my ass off at it because I'm like, oh damn, she went there.
I mean, the thing is I mean, I guess to me, I feel like that should be the end goal of what the gay movement is that ultimately it's, you know, just fuck people who can consent, and you shouldn't have to slap a label on it. You shouldn't feel superior for it.
Right.
And I don't think the gay movement is about feeling superior for it. It's just really fun to piss off cisgender heterosexual people.
Damn sissies.
I think the thing is also is that
CISSIES sissies.
I think
Yes.
I think the problem here is also because I often hear this from like younger LGBT people, is that a lot of them are really, because remember these folks, they grew up in a time where the battle of gay marriage was very important. Whereas for us,
also,
we were already, most of us were late teens, already adults. You know.
Yeah, I mean, so this was 2015. I was 17 when gay marriage became legal. So like I do remember a time where gay marriage wasn't legal, and I like got into shouting matches with members of my family about like how it's literally just straight people thinking that they're better than gay people, and they're afraid of some kind of sanctity of marriage, when really marriage is a bullshit fucking construct that like it doesn't actually carry any basis. And like, yeah, I'm just like, fuck the institution of marriage. It's a money making scam, and just like, but I'm also not going to rail against like a gay marriage, because it was clearly a discriminatory practice against gay people, and it was straight people feeling like somehow their sex was superior to the sex that gay people had. But remember, lesbians come more than straight women.
I'm going to take a bit more of a nuanced position on this one. I can understand why the battle of marriage was seen as such an important thing for many people, because I mean,
see why it was important. I see why it was important. Like, I wasn't saying that it wasn't important. It's more that I just don't. I can see why it was important. Like, definitely, it was a victory in my opinion.
I mean,
I was just making the point that like straight people, like their like attachment to marriage is like, I really don't get like why they were so adamant that gay people don't get married. Because it really doesn't affect them like in any actual material way, other than, ew, Tim married Jim or some shit like that.
There's two dimensions to the issue, in the sense that legalizing gay marriage is a matter of essentially stopping state persecution of gay people, state repression of gay people, and then the other part of it is that yes, marriage is about more or less the state recognizing your identity and your partnership with someone, and in many ways it's a kind of meaningless institution without state power, but that doesn't mean that there's not a need to
fight for gay marriage,
resist state repression. Essentially, I mean, you can make.
I got into yelling matches that it was an act of state repression against like gay people.
Yep.
Because it very much was.
I want to add a more materialist reasoning here on this particular matter, because I know y'all are seeing it from a more symbolic position. But I would like to add one important caveat. Well, not so much caveat, but one important reason, and that is the two things here. One, benefits, because marriage does provide benefits,
Yes.
and two, the issue of ownership of property and family, because I think we can call back to the AIDS crisis that a lot of folks were not allowed, and even outside, even after, a lot of partners, especially when you're in hospitals, if you're not a family member, you're not allowed to see them.
Mm.
And a lot of
Definitely.
family members would usually go out of their way to avoid their partners to stop them from seeing them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also the question of property also becomes a major problem, because then let's say what happens to this person's house if they pass away? Are they going to give it to the partner, or is the family going to take possession of it, or will the state?
Mm-hmm.
So I think those materialist stipulations, I think, add a really important component of why people were fighting so much for marriage. And while I personally would argue that I didn't have to end up like this, and unfortunately, I think the biggest reason it ended up becoming successful is because the respectable elements of the LGBT community managed to successfully implant this issue to everybody. Because we could have gone a whole different way about this. It could have been universal health care. It could have had a bigger emphasis on on civil unions to provide such rights to exist. But marriage, by and large, still benefits the much more middle class, upper class members of the LGBT community. They're more interested in
I know it's never going to help my gay ass.
right. It's like it's going to help out more of the Andrew Sullivans of the world, as opposed to someone like Matilda Bernstein Sycamore or somebody like that. Who's like a radical writer of like LGBT issues. There's a clearly a huge difference there in who exactly it benefits, because not everyone's invested in marriage. But it's for the same reason that a lot of heterosexuals get married. They don't get married because they're getting married because out of love. They're getting married because it provides them benefits.
That was actually something that in high school, I remember people, because I would always bring up that like I don't really put like that much faith into marriage, and I'm not trying all that hard to get married. They're like, oh, but like, what if you love this person a lot? I'm like, well, I can love somebody without marrying them, but marrying is more for the benefits, and it's not really going to help my ass.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but for many people, those benefits do help them, and that's why they end up doing what they end up doing. That's the point I'm trying to make here, because
Definitely.
because idealistically, I would rather live in a world where such a need is not required.
Yeah.
To take the words from Yasmin Nair once again, and idealistically, I would rather live in a world where such a institution would not have to be in need. Where people are being helped out in terms of issues of universal health care, lack of serious poverty in general. Having the right to see your partner's family or not, especially.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say you should have the right to see your partner. Like, if your partner's like dying in the hospital, you should have the right to see your partner, regardless of whether you're married to them. But
and this, I think this also. There's an important thing here that I wanted to point out. This is especially true if you're elderly, because when you're elderly, a lot of especially when you're single, one of the most important things when you're an elder person is those long-lasting friendships that you have with other people. And it becomes a serious misfortune when they're sick or dying, or are not married. They are not able to provide said property or even visitation to the hospital because they're not family related. It becomes abundantly clear that certain categorizations are more benefited than others, and that beneficiary is most certainly the nuclear family here. You know, so I think it's important. I think it's important in general, especially whether you're LGBT or not, to recognize that these issues still matter, and it should not, especially when it comes to the issues of friendships and romance and long-lasting relationships that do not include marriage, to be included in terms of issues of benefits, because it's rather selfish and unfair that people who are not married are not allowed to be given such rights to begin with. It's actually pretty sickening if you ask me.
Mhm.
You know,
It really is. Oh, you're not family, so this person has to die alone.
right? Like, how does anyone necessarily look at that issue and think, "Oh, well, this is certainly justified because they're not married"? Like that's preposterous. And
Mhm.
in other countries, they recognize that, but in this country, we don't really recognize it. Though, if I remember correctly, funny enough, the former president Barack Obama actually did point that out when he was writing about this whole about I mean not so much when he was talking about this issue about like how other people have long lasting relationships and all this other stuff outside of marriage, and how it's important to recognize those things.
And those people should definitely be able to see like their dying friends. Like
You know,
it, it's inhumane to say, oh, it's inhumane to the person who's dying too to say, oh, your good friend can't see you because they're not family.
right.
Like what? Like what? That this good friend is like has been way better to me my whole life than my quote unquote family, and you're telling me I can't see him as I'm dying or them as I'm dying.
Or
Be a
provide
him,
them.
her,
No,
them, ladies and or no, ladies and gentle thems.
you know, it's a really bizarre reality that we live in sometimes.
Yep.
I
And this
finally
is
live.
why.
I'm just waiting for Rod Sterling to be like, "This is the Twilight Zone."
But see that's why I've been so critical of the whole marriage issue in general. It's not so much because I don't want it to happen per se, but rather that the materialist benefits seem to only want to is apparently ever allowed to be solidified if and when you are married, and that there's no consideration for single people, and there's no
Mhm.
consideration for people who are in relationships that are not recognized by the state.
Mhm.
And
Guess
I
I'll
do
just
think those
die
things are important
alone.
to point out. That's why there was a real pushback against gay marriage by serious radicals at the time. You know, they're not despising it because we despise the idea of marriage in an edgelord kind of way. No, they had real materialist reasons to be critical. You know,
Well,
Oh yeah, there were definite. I think there were definitely better ways that it could have been done, or that like people could have gone about it. But yeah, it doesn't mean marriage like that. Gay marriage wasn't an important issue, and like, but yeah, we just don't think about a lot of these other aspects, like long-lasting friendships outside of your family. Because if I'm completely honest, if I were dying tomorrow and the only people I could see were my family and not like my friends who were radicals. Or if I was told that I have to kick people out because only a certain amount of people are to visit, my family's getting kicked right out the fucking door.
mhm.
Bring in my gay and trans comrades. They're the ones who I want to see before I die. I want to die happy.
right? Now,
Mhm.
I mean, before I forget, I mean, I will add one more critique I have about the whole gay marriage thing before everyone has to opt out.
Mhm.
I think the biggest problem that I also have with the whole gay marriage thing is that it effectively, completely dismissed every other important issue that we've had. You know, we still have a lot of major problems when it comes to LGBT issues.
Why do we even have Pride? They were all given marriage 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is so silly to me because most people are not invested in marriage. Not everyone cares about marriage. But there's still a lot of major problems still being LGBT. You know, you still have a lot of trans women of color still dying around the ages of 30, 35. You still have a lot of
Dying,
homelessness.
that's being killed.
Yes, they're being killed.
Yes, you know, they're being literally killed at such young
Murdered.
ages, and for some reason that doesn't shake anybody enough. You know, there's also
I
the
don't
problem.
know. I'm shaking pretty much every time I read one of those articles. Like,
Yeah.
Yes, but
yes,
you know,
it's
you're a
not
trans
me.
woman. You have every reason to.
Oh yeah, you know, it's like, yes, it may not be me, and you know, as a white trans person, it's very it's very unlikely to be me, but it still shakes me to my very core that someone can look at a trans person, regardless of like what their race is, and think that and see that they got murdered and not think it's an absolute fucking tragedy that so many of them are being murdered at very young ages.
Right. You know, and that to me has always been rather, disturbing, especially because I live in a state. You know, I live in a state where it's supposedly very gay friendly, but yet you still hear about trans women of color still being attacked and killed. You know, so
I mean, I literally work with I work with people of color who talk just as violently about trans women as like the white men do.
I have no
Like
doubt about that because I heard
I've
recently.
I literally had one guy that I work with who's from Puerto Rico who was talking shit about his quote unquote brother who is a trans woman and and also asking how the hell do trans women find men, because if I found out that a girl I was with had a penis, I'd kill her. Like, pretty casually said it. And
That's unfortunate.
like they're pretty casually willing to be like, yeah, you know, I beat the shit, or I beat the shit out of this person or kill them because they had a penis and I'm insecure in my sexual orientation and have a very cis-normative idea of gender.
See, that's also the problem with being a double minority. Right? Especially when you're a person of color, you know how difficult this issue can get. Because on one hand, you, especially if you're queer, you know that as a queer person of color, you know that you have to face a lot of real problems. Because on one hand, your community still has a big problem with us even existing because we don't adhere to the heterosexual order. And then you have the other part of the LGBT community blaming you for all the problems that they have. You know, and it sucks and it hurts because you know you're being constantly attacked on both ends. Because here you are, in your own community. People do not trust you. People don't like you because religion and machismo are so embedded in our culture that it's very difficult to get rid of it. You know, and then at the same time you have a whole community. You have the LGBT community is still very overwhelmingly white and does very little for you as a person of color who's queer. You know, because you still have a lot of problems with HIV, especially if you're Black and Latino.
Oh yeah, because of the way poverty,
Because of poverty and racism.
poverty. Yeah, because of poverty and racism, like just healthcare is even more abysmal if you're a person of color than if you're white.
Right.
Because of both racism and poverty.
And also, this
where
is also
for me,
where
it's just the poverty issue.
Right, and this is also where the LGBT community fails people of color who are queer, because it wasn't until very recently that the Human Rights Campaign even suggested to give a shit about trans people. I don't think many people realize that, but it wasn't that long ago that the Human Rights Campaign didn't give a fuck about trans people until very recently. And not to mention that time when they also decided to support a Republican politician over a progressive, which was not that long ago. I forgot who wrote about that. I think it was somebody in Current Affairs that wrote about that, about the Human Rights Campaign and how ridiculously exclusionary they tend to be, and how unbearably white that whole place can be. So, if you want to look at an institution, even within the LGBT community, that still fails a lot of people of color who are queer, look no more further than the Human Rights Campaign and a lot of these other organizations that exist, who do very little in general for queer people who are of color. Because again, you just have to look at those rates of HIV. You still have to look at the complete neglect of how we talk about trans women of color. You, as a person of color and queer, you're being attacked on both ends. And that's the deep, unfortunate reality.
And it really feels like there's nowhere you can go in that situation, I imagine.
Exactly, because that's the big problem. Because on one hand, like I said, on one hand, there is a crowd that's wanting to blame your people for all the problems here. And then you have a community of your own people who they're so deeply invested in religion and machismo, men and women alike.
Yep.
Because patriarchy is a relation. To me, patriarchy is a relational power dynamic.
Patriarchy is the cocaine of white supremacist society.
See, the thing is, that's the interesting part about patriarchy. Is that I know a lot of people like to talk about patriarchy as something that's largely top down, but what is failed to be realized is the problem here is that it is also it's more relational, because again, you can't have support of such oppressive power without also not changing the minds of other people and those who are really seeking to uphold it. Because it's not just the powerful that are your problem. It is also the people around you. Power is not something that just exists as a linear thing. Power is distributed amongst everybody. And I think that's why it's important.
And it's distributed in all kinds of weird ways that you might not think of.
Right. That's why I take the Foucaultian position on that, which I always felt like as anarchists, I believe that's the way we should look at power. We should never look at power as something that's top down. Because if one is really truly against hierarchy, you have to understand that power does not just simply exist from the powerful to the powerless. You have people around you that are more willing, just as willing. They might not have the power that the upper classes and those with domination have, but they do, on the other hand, have advantages over you.
Yeah, I was going to say they are more than willing to leverage what little power they do have over you.
Right, because power is seductive.
No
one likes the idea of realizing that they're seen as inferior.
Yeah, if you're in my case, or I'm a white queer person, I might come across another, who's also poor. I might come across another poor person who's straight, who's also very homophobic, and is very, and I mean, I have, who's still very much willing to leverage the fact that they're straight against me, or that they're cisgender and heterosexual.
Of course.
Just
that's how complicated how power can be. And that's the thing I don't think we really like to talk about in general, because it makes it seem like some power is seen more important and worthy of being concerned about than others, which is ridiculous, because I'm a big believer that you should care about all issues. You should care about issues of power in general, and just because they don't affect you doesn't mean that you should have less concern over them.
Right.
But if it doesn't affect me, it's not a problem.
That's silly, because for example, the issues of disability should be a major issue for a lot of people. I mean, most of us are largely able-bodied, but just because we're not disabled doesn't mean you shouldn't care about other people.
Yeah.
Who, especially if they are disabled, you should care.
Actually, I did donate a lot of money to a friend of mine who I friended over 2 years ago because they're disabled, and then she's raising her kid, and so almost every chance I get, I kind of like mention Joanna. She has a baking bowl out that I can. Oh wait, I don't have the ability to like link it in the chat, so I'll link it in the comment below after we're done with the stream. So just spread around that baking bowl, spread around her PayPal. It's severejoe@gmail.com via PayPal if you can donate $5,
Yeah,
$10.
I'll actually pin the comment as well.
Yeah, it's because I always try to promote that. I promote that on CHI's Ask Away, so I promote that on CHI's Patreon Hangouts as well. I promote that on Chrissy Witcher's Patreon Hangouts, and sometimes even if I'm in like the live chat where I have mob abilities on, like on Kevin Logan or Chrissy Winters, I try to like mention, hey, could you share around at least the baking bowl or share around her PayPal link, and just so that more eyes can see that, then maybe hopefully people can like give money to. And like my sister-in-law said, like she'll just add my friend to the list of disabled people, all who are sharing around the same $20 amongst everyone. But yeah, I think that's a good time to end this stream. So Miguel, Piper, do you want like anything you want to promote? Like you're doing something on your YouTube channel or something like that?
Okay, so my channel is Social Revolution, if you didn't know. I do videos essentially presenting an anarchist analysis of the world. I do the same on my blog, except in the form of articles. And I'm currently working on what I hope will be I hope to write many books, but I'm currently working on the first of them, which is about the 20th century Communist Party ruled states. Yeah, I guess check out my blog, which is Rage Against Capital, and my channel, Social Revolution. If you like that stuff and want to support me, I would appreciate Patreon donations, but that's, only do that if you really enjoy my stuff. So, yeah, I guess that's it for me.
Miguel, do you have anything you want to plug?
No, I mean, I don't really have a YouTube or anything. I just go on other people's talk shows and stuff because I usually get invited. But that's as much you'll ever see me in. But most of it is stuck in the depths of history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Miguel's just a frequent visitor on mine and Piper's channels.
That's cool.
I'm assuming a couple others as well, but I know that me and I actually met Miguel on like one of Piper's streams. So.
Oh yes, that very first, very controversial things that I've said on that one. Oh my god! Someday I will have to revise some of the things I said on that one.
Well, all those streams aren't up anymore, so.
No, but somebody probably archived it.
Well, I won't look. So anyway, I am Sunburn and Geek.
Great, I'm gonna get canceled.
I wouldn't be surprised if a conservative publication went after me. This guy said this a couple years ago on YouTube.
See, this is why.
You can. Sorry. Oh no, I was just gonna say that. Actually, I was just gonna make a stupid joke. I forgot what it was. Anyway, you go, Geek.
Yeah, this is why I'm not going to run for public office, because A, I don't think I would like do well. B, I'm an anarchist, I'm against the state, and C, I have said on the public stream they're recording the Beatles song, "So you want a revolution?" Well, and I just screamed, "Yes, I do!" And that started a whole conversation. But I think that's why I'm never going to like run for office, because they'll pull that up and say, "See, he's an anarchist." He's like, and yeah, and criminal anarchy is a thing in the state.
Yeah. They'll definitely pull shit up against you. So, yeah, this has been a wonderful stream, and I thank you all for coming on. Sorry I didn't invite you earlier, Miguel. I just didn't think about it, if I'm completely honest.
It's okay, because I've had a lot of changes that happen, like in terms of like work days off. so I have new days off now. So I'm a little more free to talk, especially because y'all do your like talks on the weekend mostly.
It's generally been the most convenient for most people.
Yeah, it's really a more convenient thing for me. But I think that about ends the stream.
Well, I just want to promote. I'm Summer and Geek on YouTube and Summer and Geek on Twitter, so follow me there. It's up my channel, and I don't have any planned new videos going to come out soon. But check the channel for when I actually put up my videos, other than just like years of like this stream or like other streams I've been on. But yeah, check it out.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up because I almost forgot it. But yeah, we can definitely talk a little bit more after this. But yeah, that's the stream. Thank you to everybody who came on to watch, even if you're not watching right now and you're going to catch up later, or if you can't even hear me, just anybody. Thank you.